You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength. What if I told you that most of the stress, anxiety, and emotional exhaustion you feel every day isn't caused by what happens to you, but by how much control you hand over to things you can't control? The overthinking at night, the anger you replay in your head, the way one comment, one rejection, or one bad day can shake your confidence more than it should. You're not weak for feeling this way. You were just never taught how to become mentally unbreakable. Stoicism was built for moments exactly like these, not for monks on mountains, but for people living in chaos, pressure, and uncertainty. Warriors, leaders, emperors, men who faced loss, betrayal, and fear, and still remained calm, grounded, and unshaken. In this video, you'll learn 8 Stoic habits that quietly rewire your mind. Habits that make you emotionally disciplined, mentally resilient, and immune to unnecessary suffering. These aren't motivational slogans. These are practical mental shifts you can apply immediately, today. But here, the key, each habit builds on the previous one. Miss one and the system breaks. That's why you should watch this video till the very end. Because by the final habit, you won't just understand Stoicism, you'll feel different, calmer, stronger, unmovable. If you're ready to stop being controlled by your emotions and start mastering them, let's begin. Number 1, mastering your reactions instead of trying to control outcomes. The moment you stop trying to control outcomes and start mastering your reactions, something inside you settles. Not because life suddenly becomes easier, but because you're no longer fighting reality every time it refuses to cooperate. Most mental suffering doesn't come from what happens, it comes from the desperate insistence that things should have happened differently. That inner argument drains you. It keeps you tense, alert, bracing. Stoicism steps in quietly and says, "You're exhausting yourself by wrestling with what was never yours to command." Epictetus put it plainly, "Some things are in our control and others not." That single sentence, if taken seriously, can harden your mind in the best possible way. You were never meant to manage outcomes. Outcomes are the intersection of countless forces, other people's choices, chance, timing, biology, circumstance. When you try to control them, you place your peace in a place it cannot survive. You become mentally fragile because your emotional state is now dependent on variables you don't own. That's not strength, that's quiet self-sabotage. Mastering your reactions is different. It's internal, it's disciplined, it's available to you at all times. You can't decide what happens next, but you can decide what happens inside you next. And that shift from external control to internal command is where mental begins. When you stop demanding guarantees from life, you stop being shocked by uncertainty. When you stop expecting fairness, you stop feeling betrayed by randomness. You become steady, not because life is predictable, but because you are. Reminded himself daily, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength. That wasn't poetic comfort, it was practical armor. He understood that emotional volatility isn't caused by events, it's caused by untrained interpretation. Two people can experience the same situation. One collapses, the other remains calm. The difference isn't luck, it's reaction. Most people live in outcome dependence without realizing it. They feel good only when things go their way. Calm only when circumstances align, confident only when they're winning. That's not resilience, it's conditional stability. The Stoic path asks you to build something sturdier, a mind that doesn't spike or crash with every external shift. You're not numbing yourself, you're stabilizing yourself. Here's the uncomfortable truth. The more you try to control outcomes, the more reactive you become. You start anticipating disappointment. You rehearse arguments in advance. You attach emotional meaning to future scenarios that haven't even happened yet. This creates anxiety masquerading as preparation. Stoicism cuts through that illusion. Preparation is useful. Rumination is not. Control-seeking creates rumination. Reaction mastery dissolves it. Seneca warned, "We suffer more in imagination than in reality." When you obsess over outcomes, you live mentally in the future, constantly simulating loss, failure, or rejection. Your body doesn't know the difference between imagined threat and real threat, so it stays in a low-grade state of stress. Reaction mastery pulls you back into the present moment, the only place where your power actually exists. This doesn't mean you stop caring or stop acting. It means you act fully, then release your grip. You do what is right, what is disciplined, what is aligned, and then you let go of the verdict. That detachment isn't weakness, it's psychological leverage. When you're no longer emotionally invested in a specific result, you think clearer, you respond better, you adapt faster, you become harder to manipulate and harder to destabilize. A Stoic exercise you can practice daily is the pause, not the dramatic pause, the internal one. When something triggers you, resist the urge to react immediately. Even a few seconds is enough. In that space, ask yourself, is this within my control? If the answer is no, redirect your energy inward. Focus on posture, breath, tone, thought. You're training your nervous system to look inward for authority instead of outward for permission. Another practice is outcome neutrality. Before taking action, remind yourself, I am responsible for effort, not results. Say it until it becomes instinct. This rewires your relationship with success and failure. Success becomes feedback, not validation. Failure becomes information, not identity. You stay composed because your self-worth is no longer tied to how things turn out. This habit also sharpens courage. When you're not obsessed with outcomes, you're more willing to act boldly. Fear loses leverage when it can no longer threaten your emotional stability. You stop hesitating. You stop second-guessing. You stop shrinking. Stoicism doesn't make you passive, it makes you decisive without desperation. There will be moments when your instincts scream to control, fix, or force. That's normal. You've been conditioned to believe that anxiety equals responsibility. It doesn't. Responsibility is clarity. Responsibility is choosing the right response even when emotions surge. Each time you master a reaction, even imperfectly, you reinforce the habit. Calm is built the same way strength is, through repetition under resistance. End your day with a simple Stoic reflection. Ask yourself, where did I try to control what wasn't mine today? Then ask, where did I respond with discipline instead? You're not looking for perfection. You're building awareness. Awareness precedes mastery. Mental doesn't come from a life without stress. It comes from a mind that doesn't panic under it. When you stop chasing control and start cultivating composure, life loses its power to shake you. You still feel. You still care. But you are no longer ruled. And that quiet, grounded, unshakable is the Stoic edge. Number 2, detaching your self-worth from praise, attention, or approval. Detaching your self-worth from praise, attention, or approval is one of the most difficult habits to build, and one of the most liberating once it takes root. At first, it feels unnatural, almost like you're stepping away from something that once gave you oxygen. You may not even realize how much of your emotional energy has been outsourced to reactions, validation, nods of agreement, or silent recognition. But the Stoics were clear about this. The moment your worth depends on something external, your peace becomes fragile. You are no longer standing on solid ground. You're balancing on the opinions of others, and opinions are the most unstable currency there is. Reminded himself, I do my duty, other things trouble me not. That sentence alone carries a lifetime of discipline. When you begin to live this way, your focus shifts inward. You stop asking, was I liked? And start asking, was I aligned? And that shift changes everything. Praise becomes pleasant but unnecessary. Criticism becomes information, not injury. Silence no longer feels like rejection, it feels like space. The hunger for approval doesn't come from weakness, it comes from conditioning, from early signals that acceptance equals safety, from subtle rewards for fitting in and quiet penalties for standing alone. Over time, you learn to measure yourself through reflection rather than conviction. You adjust your tone, you soften your truth, you edit your instincts, not because you're dishonest, but because you want harmony. And while harmony sounds noble, harmony built on self-abandonment eventually turns into resentment. Stoicism doesn't ask you to reject connection. It asks you to stop depending on it for identity. Epictetus said, "If you want to be invincible, make sure you depend on nothing that lies outside your control." Approval is outside your control. Praise is unpredictable. Attention is fickle. When your sense of worth is tied to these things, your emotional state becomes reactive. You rise when you're affirmed. You shrink when you're ignored. You hesitate when you might displease. That is not freedom. That is emotional weather dependence. Detachment in the Stoic sense isn't coldness. It's clarity. You still care. You still show up fully, but you no longer need the response to justify your existence. You act because it's right, not because it's rewarded. And paradoxically, that makes you stronger, calmer, and more grounded. People feel it, not because you demand respect, but because you're no longer asking for it. When you detach from praise, something subtle happens inside you. Your internal dialogue changes. You stop narrating yourself through imagined reactions. You stop replaying moments to see how they landed. You stop chasing emotional echoes. Instead, you begin listening inward, to principle, to intention, to reason. Seneca wrote, "The reward of a good deed is having done it." That sentence cuts straight through the addiction to applause. The act itself becomes sufficient. But this habit doesn't form overnight. At first, the silence feels loud. The absence of validation feels uncomfortable. You may catch yourself wanting to explain, justify, or signal your worth. That's normal. Don't fight it. Observe it. Stoicism teaches mastery through awareness, not suppression. Each time you notice the impulse to seek approval and choose stillness instead, you're reclaiming a piece of yourself. A powerful daily exercise is negative visualization applied to approval. Imagine not being praised. Imagine not being noticed. Imagine your effort passing quietly without acknowledgement. Sit with that image until the emotional charge softens. This isn't pessimism, it's training. You're teaching your nervous system that lack of validation is not a threat, that you remain whole regardless. Over time, this practice dissolves the fear beneath the craving. Another exercise is internal scoring. At the end of the day, rate yourself not on outcomes but on adherence to values. Ask yourself, did I speak honestly? Did I act with restraint? Did I remain composed? Did I choose principle over popularity? These are scores no one else can give you, and that's exactly why they matter. You become your own witness, your own judge, your own source of dignity. Detaching from approval also sharpens your presence. When you're no longer scanning for reactions, you become more grounded in the moment. Your words carry more weight because they aren't diluted by neediness. Your silence becomes powerful because it's chosen, not anxious. Wrote, "The best revenge is not to be like your enemy." Applied here, the best defense against judgment is not indifference but self-sufficiency. There's a quiet confidence that emerges when you no longer perform for acceptance. You don't rush to be understood. You don't over-explain. You allow disagreement without defensiveness. And this doesn't make you rigid, it makes you flexible in the right way. You can adapt without abandoning yourself. You can listen without dissolving. You can stand firm without hostility. This habit also protects you from emotional manipulation. When approval no longer governs you, pressure loses its leverage. You're harder to provoke, harder to shame, harder to control, not because you're closed off, but because you're anchored. As Epictetus taught, it is not things themselves that disturb us, but our judgments about them. Praise and criticism are just sounds until you assign them power. End each day with a simple reflection. Where did I act today without needing to be seen? Where did I choose integrity over applause? These moments may feel small, but they are the bricks of mental. Over time, they build a foundation that cannot be shaken by opinion or neglect. When your worth comes from within, the world no longer gets to vote on your value. Praise becomes a gift, not a requirement. Attention becomes optional. Approval becomes pleasant noise. And you stand taller, not because you're admired, but because you're aligned. Number 3, practicing voluntary discomfort to strengthen resilience. Voluntary discomfort is one of those ideas that sounds harsh until you feel what it actually gives you. At first, it feels unnecessary. Why would you choose difficulty when comfort is available? Why step into resistance when ease is right there? But the Stoics never chased comfort. They chased strength. And strength, real strength, is built when you stop letting comfort dictate who you are allowed to become. When you practice voluntary discomfort, you're not punishing yourself. You're reclaiming authority over your impulses. You're telling your mind, I decide what I can endure. That single shift changes everything. Seneca put it plainly when he wrote, "Set aside a certain number of days during which you shall be content with the scantiest and cheapest fare, with coarse and rough dress, saying to yourself the while, is this the condition that I feared?" The lesson isn't deprivation. It's freedom. When you voluntarily face what you once avoided, fear loses its leverage over you. Most mental fragility today doesn't come from trauma, it comes from overprotection. From a life engineered to avoid discomfort at all costs. The problem is when discomfort finally arrives, and it always does, you feel unarmed, unprepared, overwhelmed. Voluntary discomfort reverses this. It trains your nervous system to stay steady when things feel unpleasant. You stop panicking at resistance. You stop interpreting challenge as danger. You start seeing it as familiar terrain. You don't do this to become numb. You do it to become grounded. There's a difference. Stoicism never aimed to kill emotion. It aimed to master reaction. Reminded himself, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength. Voluntary discomfort is how you practice that power daily, in small ways, quiet ways, ways no one else needs to notice. The modern mind is constantly negotiating with itself. I'll do it later. I deserve ease. This is too much. Voluntary discomfort cuts through that noise. It teaches you to act without bargaining, to move without needing perfect conditions, to remain composed even when the mind protests. And once you prove to yourself that you can sit inside discomfort without collapsing, something inside you hardens in the best way possible. You begin to trust yourself, not hypothetically, not intellectually, viscerally. You know you can endure. You know you won't fall apart just because something feels unpleasant. That confidence is unshakable because it's earned, not imagined, not borrowed from motivation or affirmation, built through repetition. Epictetus said, "Don't seek for things to happen the way you want them to, rather wish that what happens happen the way it happens." Voluntary discomfort trains acceptance at the level of the body, not just the mind. You stop flinching at inconvenience. You stop resenting friction. You stop needing the world to soften for you to function. That's mental. What makes this practice powerful is that it's chosen. You're not reacting to hardship. You're initiating it. That changes the entire psychological dynamic. You're no longer a victim of circumstances. You're a participant in your own strengthening. Discomfort becomes a tool, not a threat. Resistance becomes a signal to stay present, not to escape. There's also humility in this practice. Voluntary discomfort strips away entitlement. It reminds you that ease is not guaranteed. That comfort is a privilege, not a right. And paradoxically, this makes you calmer, not bitter. Grateful, not deprived. When you stop clinging to comfort, you start appreciating it more deeply when it's there. Here, how you begin quietly, deliberately, without drama. Start with intentional restraint. Choose moments where you don't immediately satisfy an urge, not to suppress it, to observe it. Let the impulse rise, let it speak. Then let it pass without obedience. This trains patience at a neurological level. You're rewiring your response to craving not through force but through awareness. Another exercise is controlled exposure. Choose mild forms of discomfort and stay present inside them longer than you want to. Not to prove anything, not to toughen up for show, but to teach your mind that discomfort is survivable, that it peaks, that it fades, that you remain intact throughout. This dismantles fear at its root. You can also practice simplicity. Strip away excess stimulation periodically. Reduce noise. Reduce indulgence. Reduce distraction. Sit with the quiet. Let boredom surface. Let restlessness appear. Don't fill the space. This is where resilience grows, not in chaos, but in stillness that challenges your dependence on constant input. Each evening, reflect briefly. Ask yourself, where did I choose strength over ease today? It doesn't need to be dramatic. Stoicism isn't about extremes. It's about consistency. One deliberate act of discomfort per day compounds faster than any burst of intensity. What you'll notice over time is subtle but profound. Your reactions slow down. Your tolerance widens. Situations that once rattled you now register as neutral. You stop needing to control everything because you trust your ability to adapt. That's the core of resilience, not rigid toughness but flexible stability. Wrote, the impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. Voluntary discomfort teaches you to live that truth. You stop asking how to avoid difficulty and start asking how to use it. And once you do, very little can break you, because you've already practiced standing firm without guarantees. This habit doesn't make life harder, it makes you stronger. And when you are strong, life feels lighter, not because it changed, but because you did. Number 4, accepting reality fully, without emotional resistance. There is a kind of strength that doesn't announce itself, doesn't tense its jaw, doesn't argue with the universe. It's the strength that comes from accepting reality fully without emotional resistance. Not liking it, not approving of it, not pretending it's fair. Simply seeing what is as it is and standing steady inside that truth. This habit alone can make you mentally unbreakable because most suffering doesn't come from events. It comes from your refusal to let events be what they are. The Stoics were relentless about this point. Wrote, "You are distressed by nothing but your own judgment. Let that land, not the situation, not the outcome, not the loss, delay, rejection, or uncertainty. Your judgment about it. Emotional resistance is the inner protest that says, this shouldn't be happening, or this must change for me to be okay." And every time you cling to that protest, you tighten the knot inside yourself. Acceptance loosens it. Acceptance isn't weakness, it's clarity without drama. It's the moment you stop wasting energy fighting reality and start using that energy to respond intelligently. When you resist reality emotionally, you live in constant friction. Your mind is always pushing against what already exists. That push creates exhaustion, bitterness, anxiety, a sense of being at war with life. Acceptance ends the war, not by surrendering your values, but by surrendering the fantasy that reality owes you a different shape. Epictetus said it plainly, "Do not seek for events to happen as you wish, but wish for events to happen as they do happen, and your life will go smoothly." This isn't passive resignation, it's strategic alignment. You stop arguing with gravity. You stop demanding the past be different. You stop emotionally negotiating with facts. And in doing so, you reclaim your power. When you resist reality, your emotions spike. When you accept it, your emotions settle. Not because you suppress them, but because they no longer need to scream. Resistance amplifies emotion. Acceptance integrates it. You still feel disappointment. You still feel frustration. But those feelings pass through you instead of hijacking you. You don't build a story around them. You don't let them define you. You let them exist, then move. This habit requires discipline because the mind loves commentary. It wants to label, judge, blame, rehearse, replay. Acceptance cuts through that noise. It says, "This is what's happening. Now what?" That question alone shifts you from victimhood to agency, from emotional reaction to deliberate action, from fragility to resilience. Seneca warned, "We suffer more in imagination than in reality." Emotional resistance is imagination at war with fact. You imagine how things should feel, should go, should resolve. Reality refuses to cooperate, and instead of adapting, you resist. That resistance multiplies pain. Acceptance collapses it. You don't become unbreakable by hardening yourself. You become unbreakable by becoming flexible. Reality is always moving. When you try to stay rigid, it breaks you. When you learn to flow with it without losing your principles, you endure. You adapt. You outlast. Acceptance doesn't mean you stop striving. It means you stop flinching. Here, where practice begins. Start with this internal rule: facts first, feelings second. When something happens, name it without commentary. Strip the language down. No exaggeration. No moral charge. Just the raw fact. This trains your mind to separate reality from interpretation. Over time, you'll notice how much of your emotional pain came from the interpretation, not the fact itself. Another exercise is negative visualization, a Stoic favorite. Spend a few quiet minutes imagining loss, delay, difficulty, not to scare yourself, but to rehearse acceptance. When the mind becomes familiar with reality's range, it stops panicking when conditions change. Practice this daily, reminding himself that obstacles are not interruptions, they are features of life. When you accept this ahead of time, reality stops shocking you. Practice allowing emotions without feeding them. When a wave rises, don't suppress it and don't dramatize it. Observe it. Breathe. Say internally, "This is a sensation, not a command." This creates space between feeling and action. That space is where lives. You don't eliminate emotion, you govern it. Acceptance also means letting go of the need for immediate relief. Emotional resistance often shows up as urgency, the need for things to resolve now so you can feel okay. Stoicism teaches patience with discomfort. Seneca wrote, "A man who suffers before it is necessary suffers more than is necessary." Acceptance trains you to sit with uncertainty without collapsing, to wait without whining, to endure without complaint. There's a quiet confidence that comes from this habit. When you accept reality, you stop fearing it. You stop bargaining with it. You stop building your identity around how things should be. You become adaptable, grounded, calm. That calm isn't passive, it's lethal to chaos. It makes you hard to manipulate, hard to provoke, hard to destabilize. You'll notice that people who resist reality are constantly emotional, always offended, always anxious, always reactive. Acceptance drains that volatility. You respond instead of react. You move deliberately. You don't waste energy fighting what already is. You conserve it for what you can actually influence: your actions, your character, your next move. End each day with a simple Stoic reflection. What did I resist today that I could have accepted? Not to shame yourself, to sharpen awareness. Over time, you'll catch resistance earlier. You'll soften faster. You'll recover quicker. And that's what mental really is, not the absence of stress, but rapid return to equilibrium. Reminded himself, the impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. Acceptance is how you turn obstacles into ground. When you stop emotionally resisting reality, reality stops feeling like an enemy. It becomes terrain. and you become someone who can walk it calmly, no matter how uneven it gets. That's the habit: see clearly, accept fully, move wisely, and nothing can shatter you because you're no longer at war with what is. Number 5, speaking less and observing more in moments of pressure. When pressure rises, most people rush to speak. They explain, they justify, they defend. They fill the air because silence feels dangerous. But Stoicism teaches you something radically different. Silence, when chosen consciously, is not weakness, it is command. Speaking less and observing more in moments of pressure is one of the fastest ways to become mentally unbreakable, because it removes you from the emotional chaos and places you back in authority over your own mind. Pressure tries to hijack your mouth before it hijacks your reason. It pushes you to react instead of respond, to say something, anything, just to relieve the tension inside your chest. But the Stoics were clear on this point. Epictetus said, "We have 2 ears and 1 mouth so that we may listen twice as much as we speak." That wasn't poetic advice. It was strategic. Listening creates space. Space creates clarity, and clarity gives you power. When you speak less, you stop leaking information. You stop revealing emotional investment prematurely. You stop giving others access to your inner weather before you've understood it yourself. Observation, on the other hand, sharpens your perception. You begin to notice tone instead of just words, intent instead of noise, patterns instead of moments. This shift alone changes how you experience pressure. Instead of being inside it, you're above it. Most pressure isn't external, it's internal urgency, the feeling that you must respond now, correct now, prove now. Stoicism trains you to pause right there. Wrote, "You always own the option of having no opinion." That line is a mental shield. You don't owe reactions. You don't owe immediate clarity. You don't owe explanations when your mind is still settling. Silence becomes a buffer between stimulus and response, and that buffer is where resilience lives. When you observe more, you reclaim time, and time is everything under pressure. The mind stabilizes when it's not forced to perform instantly. Your breathing slows, your body softens, your thoughts align. Speaking less isn't about withdrawal, it's about restraint. It's about refusing to let external tension dictate your internal rhythm. That's mental toughness in its form. There's also something else happening beneath the surface. When you stop talking, you stop feeding the emotional fire. Pressure thrives on engagement. It grows louder when you wrestle with it verbally. Observation starves it. You let things reveal themselves instead of chasing resolution. Seneca wrote, "He who is calm is free." Calm doesn't come from winning arguments. It comes from not being pulled into unnecessary ones in the first place. This habit also retrains your identity. You stop seeing yourself as someone who must always respond, always clarify, always defend. You become someone who chooses words deliberately, sparingly, with intent. That alone changes how others experience you, but more importantly, it changes how you experience yourself. You feel grounded, centered, less shaken by emotional turbulence. Now here's the hard truth. Silence will feel uncomfortable at first. Your ego will resist it. You'll feel the urge to jump in, correct misunderstandings, assert your position. That urge is exactly what Stoicism asks you to examine. Ask yourself in those moments, is speaking right now an act of wisdom or an attempt to soothe my anxiety? That question alone can stop you mid-reaction. A powerful Stoic practice is the pause drill. When pressure hits, commit to saying nothing for a short window, not to suppress emotion but to observe it. Notice how the impulse to speak rises, peaks, and falls. You'll discover something important. Most urges to speak are temporary. They burn hot and fast. If you don't act on them immediately, they lose their grip. This is how you train emotional endurance. Another exercise is internal narration. Instead of speaking outwardly, narrate inwardly. Describe what you're sensing, the tension, the speed of your thoughts, the emotional charge. By numbing it internally, you regain control without broadcasting it. This aligns with reminder. If you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it. Observation corrects distorted estimates. Speaking less also protects your energy. Words cost energy, especially under stress. Silence conserves it. You stop exhausting yourself emotionally. You stop replaying conversations mentally because you said too much. You stop second-guessing yourself. There's a quiet confidence that develops when you know you didn't overextend verbally. That confidence compounds over time. This doesn't mean becoming passive or detached. Stoicism is not avoidance, it's timing. When you do speak, your words land with more weight because they are fewer and cleaner. You're no longer reacting, you're choosing. And choice is the opposite of pressure. End each day with reflection. Ask yourself, where did I speak from impulse today and where did I hold my tongue? No judgment, just awareness. Over time, you'll notice a shift. Pressure will feel slower, less urgent, less personal. You'll feel steadier even in silence. Reminded himself, the best revenge is not to be like your enemy. In moments of pressure, the enemy is not another person, it's reactivity. Speaking less and observing more keeps you from becoming like it. And once you master that, very little can shake you. Number 6, training yourself to remain calm under provocation. Being calm under provocation isn't about being passive, weak, or numb. It's about power, the kind that doesn't announce itself. The kind that doesn't need to react to prove it exists. When you train yourself to remain calm while others try to pull you into emotional chaos, you're no longer living at the mercy of external noise. You stop leaking energy. You stop handing your mind over to impulses that don't deserve it. And slowly, steadily, you become unbreakable. Most people believe calmness is a personality trait. It's not, it's a skill. And like any skill, it can be trained. The Stoics were ruthless about this. Reminded himself, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength. Provocation is an outside event. Words, tones, attitudes, disrespect, manipulation. None of these enter your mind unless you open the door. Calmness begins the moment you realize you have a choice, even when it doesn't feel like one. Provocation works because it bypasses reason and triggers instinct. It aims straight for your ego, your pride, your fear of being disrespected. Once hooked, you react automatically. Your voice changes, your body tightens, your thinking narrows, and in that moment you are no longer in control, you are being controlled. The Stoics saw this clearly. Epictetus warned, if someone succeeds in provoking you, realize that your mind is complicit. That's not blame, that's empowerment. Because if your mind is complicit, your mind can also withdraw consent. Training calm under provocation starts with reframing what's happening. You stop seeing provocation as a threat and start seeing it as training, resistance, weight on the bar. Without resistance, there is no strength. Each attempt to unsettle you becomes a chance to reinforce self-command. This shift alone changes everything. Instead of thinking, why is this happening to me? You begin to think, this is exactly where I practice. The Stoics didn't aim to eliminate emotion. They aimed to govern it. Seneca wrote, the greatest remedy for anger is delay. Delay creates space. Space creates choice. When you pause, even briefly, you interrupt the automatic chain reaction. You reclaim the moment. Calmness isn't about suppressing the surge, it's about not obeying it. You let the feeling rise, exist, and pass without giving it the steering wheel. You train this first internally. The real battle happens before words ever leave your mouth. When provocation hits, your mind starts telling stories, disrespect, injustice, attack. The Stoic practice is to question those stories immediately. Is this truly an attack or is it noise? Is this urgent or is it bait? Is responding necessary or merely satisfying? Most provocations collapse under scrutiny. They only feel powerful because they're unexamined. A powerful daily exercise is negative rehearsal, not to expect conflict, but to prepare your response to it. Each morning, remind yourself that you may encounter irritation, misunderstanding, or disrespect, not dramatically, calmly. Did this constantly. By anticipating provocation, you remove its shock value. When it arrives, your nervous system recognizes it. You've been here before. You don't panic. You don't rush. You stay upright inside. Another practice is breath discipline under tension. When provocation arises, your breath becomes shallow without you noticing. This fuels. Train yourself to slow the breath deliberately in moments of internal pressure. Longer exhales, relaxed jaw, dropped shoulders. This isn't spiritual fluff, it's physiological command. The body follows the breath. The mind follows the body. Calmness begins at the physical level and ripples upward. Silence is another underestimated weapon. Not silence born of fear, but silence born of control. You don't owe immediate responses. You don't owe emotional transparency. You don't owe explanations while your nervous system is activated. Epictetus advised, be mostly silent or speak merely what is necessary. Silence under provocation unsettles those who rely on your reaction to feel powerful. More importantly, it keeps you sovereign. Training calm also means detaching your identity from being right, respected, or understood in the moment. Provocation feeds on your need to defend an image. Once that image loosens its grip, the provocation loses leverage. You begin to realize that dignity doesn't need defending. It's either embodied or it is. Calmness is proof of strength. Reactivity is proof of dependence. A practical habit is post-event review, not rumination, but refinement. At the end of the day, reflect briefly on moments where you felt stirred. Ask yourself, where did I give up control? Where did I hold it? No judgment, just data. Stoicism is about progress, not perfection. Each review sharpens awareness. Each awareness strengthens future restraint. You also train calm by building internal order outside moments of conflict. Discipline in sleep, discipline in movement, discipline in attention. A disordered life breeds a reactive mind. The Stoics believed self-mastery was holistic. When your baseline state is stable, provocation has less surface area to land on. Calm isn't something you summon, it's something you live from. There's a deeper layer here that most people miss. Remaining calm under provocation isn't just about peace, it's about authority. When you don't react, you choose your response. When you choose your response, you control the direction of the moment. This doesn't mean you never speak or act. It means when you do, it's intentional, measured, and aligned with your values, not hijacked by impulse. End each day with a simple Stoic reflection. What tried to move me today, and did it succeed? You're not asking to shame yourself. You're asking to train your awareness. Reminded himself repeatedly that life is short and the mind is precious. Don't waste it on reactions you didn't choose. Calm under provocation is not weakness. It is quiet dominance. It is the ability to stand in the storm without becoming it. And the more you practice it, the more you realize something profound. Nothing outside you has the power you once thought it did. You are still here, still steady, still in command. Number 7, focusing daily on what is within your control and releasing the rest. There is a quiet power that enters your life the moment you stop wrestling with what was never yours to command. Most mental suffering doesn't come from pain itself, but from the constant friction between what is and what you think should be. You wake up already tense, not because something has happened, but because you're bracing for what might. That tension is the signal. It's the sign that your attention has drifted outside your jurisdiction. And Stoicism, at its core, is the art of bringing it back home. Epictetus laid the foundation with ruthless clarity. Some things are in our control and others not. That single sentence is not philosophy for decoration. It's a daily operating system. When you forget it, your mind scatters. You try to manage reactions, outcomes, opinions, timing, moods, none of which obey you. You exhaust yourself chasing leverage where none exists. But when you remember it, truly remember it, your nervous system exhales. You stop arguing with the universe. You start governing yourself. Focusing on what's within your control doesn't mean shrinking your ambition or lowering your standards. It means refining your aim. Your thoughts, your judgments, your effort, your discipline, your values, these are yours completely. No one can touch them without your consent. Everything else, results, recognition, timing, response, reward, belongs to fate. Reminded himself daily, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength. Not comfort, strength. The kind that doesn't depend on circumstances cooperating. The habit begins internally, often in moments you'd rather avoid. When frustration rises, that's your cue to ask a hard question. Am I focused on my action or on the outcome? Outcomes are seductive. They promise relief. They whisper that peace will come after something changes. Stoicism flips that lie. Peace comes the moment you place your attention back on what you can do right now. How you choose to think, how you choose to respond, how you choose to move forward with dignity. Releasing the rest is not indifference, it's precision. You're not numbing yourself, you're decluttering your mind. Seneca warned, we suffer more often in imagination than in reality. Most of what disturbs you hasn't happened, and most of what has happened cannot be undone. When you obsess over either, you leak energy. Mental isn't about being unaffected. It's about being unmoved by what lies outside your command. This habit requires daily training because the world constantly tempts you to outsource your peace. News, expectations, timelines, comparisons, all of them pull your attention outward. Stoicism teaches you to interrupt that pull, to pause, to separate signal from noise, to say internally, this is not mine to carry. That sentence alone can feel like putting down a weight you didn't realize you were holding. Here's a practical exercise to make this real. Each morning, take 1 minute and divide the day in your mind into 2 columns. In the first, silently list what you control: your effort, your preparation, your restraint, your courage, your honesty. In the second, list what you release: outcomes, opinions, delays, reactions, misunderstandings. You don't fight the second column. You acknowledge it and let it pass. This primes your mind to respond instead of react. Throughout the day, use friction as feedback. Whenever irritation appears, stop and ask, what am I trying to control right now that isn't mine? Then redirect. Not aggressively, calmly. You're training a muscle, not punishing a flaw. Over time, this redirection becomes automatic. Your emotional spikes shorten. Your recovery speeds up. That's resilience in practice. Another Stoic practice is the discipline of assent. Thoughts appear uninvited, judgments do not. You decide which thoughts get your agreement. When a thought says, this shouldn't be happening, you examine it. Is that within your control? No, so you withdraw assent. You replace it with something truer: this is happening. My response is mine. Called this mental hygiene. It's not passive acceptance. It's active clarity. Releasing control over externals doesn't make you weaker. It makes you harder to manipulate. When your emotional state no longer depends on how things unfold, you become steady, predictable to yourself, unpredictable to chaos. You stop being yanked around by hope and fear. You act from principle instead of impulse. That's what mental actually looks like: quiet consistency under pressure. End your day with a short audit, not a judgment, a review. Ask yourself, where did I waste energy today trying to control the uncontrollable? Then ask, where did I act with full ownership? This isn't about perfection, it's about progress. Stoicism is a practice, not a personality trait. You sharpen it daily or it dulls. Over time, something profound happens. Your mind becomes less crowded. Decisions feel simpler. You stop needing certainty before acting. You stop needing approval before standing firm. You realize that strength doesn't come from bending reality, it comes from aligning with it. As Epictetus said, don't seek for events to happen as you wish, but wish for events to happen as they do happen, and your life will go smoothly. That smoothness isn't easy, it's flowing. You don't become mentally unbreakable by armoring yourself against life. You become unbreakable by refusing to fight what you were never meant to control, and by mastering, relentlessly, what you were. Number 8, turning adversity into fuel for discipline and self-mastery. Adversity is the raw material most people try to escape, but for a Stoic, it's the forge. The very thing you wish hadn't happened is the thing that can harden you, clarify you, and strip you down to what actually matters. The difference between being broken by difficulty and becoming unbreakable because of it isn't luck or personality. It's posture. It's how you use what happens to you. You don't wait for life to get easier. You train yourself to get stronger. Wrote, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." That isn't poetic optimism. It's a manual. Adversity isn't an interruption to your growth. It is the growth if you decide to metabolize it instead of resisting it. The moment you stop asking, "Why is this happening to me?" and start asking, "What does this demand of me?" everything changes. You move from victimhood to authorship, from reaction to command. Most people leak energy when things go wrong. They ruminate, they complain internally, they replay conversations, they fantasize about different outcomes. All of that drains discipline. Stoicism teaches you to do the opposite, compress adversity into focus. When life tightens, you tighten your standards. When chaos increases, you simplify. You sleep when you say you will. You train when you don't feel like it. You speak less. You observe more. You turn pain into structure. Seneca warned, difficulties strengthen the mind as labor does the body, but only if you let them. If you treat hardship as an injustice, it weakens you. If you treat it as training, it sharpens you. The Stoic move is to refuse emotional waste. You don't dramatize setbacks. You don't personalize resistance. You don't turn discomfort into a story about your worth. You turn it into repetition. Reps build strength. Complaints don't. This is where discipline stops being punishment and becomes self-respect. You don't wake up early because life is kind. You wake up early because life is demanding and you've decided to meet it awake, not half-conscious. You don't train your body to impress anyone. You train it because it teaches you how to keep promises to yourself when motivation disappears. Adversity strips away motivation. Discipline survives without it. Epictetus said, "First say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do." Adversity tests whether that statement was fantasy or fact. When pressure hits, your true habits are revealed. Not what you intend to do, what you actually do. This is why Stoics welcome difficulty quietly. It exposes weakness without insulting you. It shows you exactly where you still negotiate with comfort. You become mentally unbreakable the moment you stop trying to feel better and start trying to get better. Feelings fluctuate, standards don't. When something goes wrong, you don't spiral inward. You turn outward into action. Clean something, train something, study something, build something. Action grounds you in the present. Rumination traps you in the past. Stoicism is a philosophy of movement. A powerful daily practice is negative rehearsal, but not in the way people misunderstand it. You don't imagine catastrophe to scare yourself. You imagine resistance to prepare yourself. You say, "Today may be difficult, people may be unfair, plans may fail, my body may feel heavy." And then you add one line, "and I will remain governed." That's self-mastery, not controlling events, but controlling your response to them. Another practice is voluntary discomfort. Choose small hardships on your own terms. Cold, silence, effort without distraction. Not because suffering is noble, but because it trains you not to panic when comfort disappears. Seneca practiced this intentionally, reminding himself that he could endure far more than his mind suggested. When adversity arrives uninvited, you're already familiar with its language. You also learn to compress your focus. Adversity overwhelms people because they try to solve everything at once. Stoicism teaches you to shrink the battlefield. One action, one decision, one breath, one standard. Ask yourself, what is mine to do right now? Not tomorrow, not after this is over, right now. This returns power to you immediately. Self-mastery isn't about emotional suppression. It's about emotional literacy. You feel frustration without becoming it. You notice anger without obeying it. You acknowledge sadness without letting it steer. Reminded himself, you don't have to turn this into something. It doesn't have to upset you. That sentence alone can stop a spiral mid-thought if you practice it enough. End your days with a Stoic audit. Ask 3 questions. Where did I face resistance today? How did I respond? What would a more disciplined version of me do next time? No shame, no self-attack, just calibration. Mastery is built through honest repetition, not emotional punishment. Over time, something remarkable happens. Adversity stops feeling personal. It becomes neutral, even useful. You stop asking for easier days and start building stronger systems. Your nervous system calms because it trusts you now. It knows that when pressure rises, you won't collapse into distraction or drama. You'll respond with structure. That's mental, not the absence of hardship, but the presence of command. You are no longer at the mercy of circumstance because you've trained yourself to turn every obstacle into fuel. And once you learn that skill, life has very little leverage over you. Before you go, remember this. Mental isn't built in moments of comfort, it's forged in moments of pressure. The Stoics understood this deeply. As reminded himself, the impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. Everything you heard in this video isn't theory. It's a way of living. These 8 Stoic habits are not meant to make you emotionless. They are meant to make you unshakable. When chaos erupts, when people test you, when life refuses to cooperate, this is what separates those who collapse from those who stand calm, composed, and in control. You won't master these habits overnight, but every time you choose discipline over impulse, reason over reaction, and purpose over comfort, you harden your mind just a little more. Over time, that inner strength becomes visible. People feel it in your presence. Life responds differently to you. If this video resonated with you, don't let it end here. Rewatch it. Apply one habit today, just one, and watch how your reactions change. And if you want to continue building a mind that cannot be shaken, subscribe to the channel, like the video, and share it with someone who needs this reminder. Because when your mind is disciplined, nothing outside you has power over you. If you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it. And this, you have the power to revoke at any moment. What if I told you that the people who dismissed you, overlooked you, or treated you as optional don't come back because you chase them? They come back when you change the way you stand. Most men believe regret is triggered by confrontation, explanations, or proving worth. Stoicism teaches the opposite. Regret is born when your absence feels heavier than your presence ever did. Think about it, you gave effort, you gave attention, you gave patience, and when it wasn't valued, something shifted inside you. The truth is, nothing unsettles people more than seeing you become calm where you once reacted, silent where you once explained, and self-directed where you once sought approval. That shift doesn't just confuse them, it pulls them back. In this video, you'll learn 9 Stoic attitudes that quietly flip the power dynamic. Not to manipulate, not to beg for validation, but to reclaim your self-respect so fully that those who underestimated you begin to feel the loss and chase it. Watch this video till the very end, because the final attitude is the one most men never master, and it's the reason regret turns into desperation. Number 1, emotional self-control, instead of reactive validation seeking. Emotional self-control isn't about becoming cold or detached. It's about refusing to hand your inner world to people who haven't earned access to it. The Stoics were relentless about this point. Epictetus said, "If you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid." What he meant was simple. Stop reacting just to be seen, liked, or reassured. The moment you feel the urge to explain yourself, justify your worth, or chase validation, that's the exact moment you've surrendered your power. You feel it in your body first, a tightening, a restlessness, a need to respond now. That's the signal. That's where self-control begins. You don't build this attitude by pretending you don't care. You build it by caring less about the wrong things. Reactive validation seeking is emotional noise. It's the habit of letting other people's attention, approval, or withdrawal dictate your mood and behavior. Stoicism teaches the opposite. Mastery starts inside. Wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength." Read that again. Slowly. Power over your mind, not over how others treat you. Not over whether they value you, just over your response. And paradoxically, that's exactly what makes people who once dismissed you start to feel uneasy, curious, even desperate. Not because you're trying to provoke them, but because you're no longer predictable. Right now, if you're honest, you probably feel emotional impulses pull at you throughout the day. The urge to reply quickly, the urge to clarify, the urge to prove you're misunderstood, the urge to be chosen. Stoicism doesn't ask you to suppress these urges. It asks you to observe them like a disciplined witness. Seneca warned, "No man is free who is not master of himself." Every time you react emotionally for validation, you train your nervous system to seek permission from others. Every time you pause instead, you reclaim ground. This is not passive, it's active restraint, and restraint is strength. Here's the shift you need to make. Stop asking, even silently, "How do they see me?" and start asking, "Am I acting in alignment with my principles?" That one question changes everything. Validation seeking looks outward. Emotional self-control turns inward. You stop performing. You stop negotiating your worth. You stop explaining yourself to imaginary judges. And suddenly, your presence feels heavier, quieter, more grounded. People sense it without understanding why. Humans are exquisitely sensitive to emotional independence. They feel it the way animals feel calm authority. No display required. This attitude is built through repetition, not insight alone. Start with a simple daily practice. When you feel an emotional spike, irritation, longing, defensiveness, don't act for 60 seconds, just sit with it. Breathe slowly. Name it internally without judgment. That's it. You're training the gap between impulse and action. Later echoed Stoic wisdom when he said that in that gap lies freedom, but the Stoics lived it centuries earlier. Each pause weakens the old habit of reaction. Each pause strengthens your internal center of gravity. Another exercise is deliberate non-response. Not silence as punishment, silence as discipline. When your instinct says, "Say something so you're not forgotten," you choose stillness instead. Reminded himself, it is not death that a man should fear, but he should fear never beginning to live. Living, in this context, means acting from intention rather than compulsion. You don't owe immediate emotional access to anyone. You don't owe constant availability. Let that truth settle. It may feel uncomfortable at first. Good. Discomfort is the sensation of growth. You should also audit your internal dialogue. Validation seeking doesn't only show up in actions, it lives in thoughts. Catch yourself replaying conversations, rehearsing explanations, imagining how someone might finally understand you. That mental rehearsal is emotional leakage. When you notice it, gently cut it off. Replace it with something grounding, a stoic reflection, a breath count, a reminder, their opinion is outside my control. Epictetus was blunt about this. He said some things are up to us and some are not. Other people's recognition never was. Acting as if it is only creates dependence. Over time, something subtle but powerful happens. Your emotions stop swinging wildly based on external feedback. You become slower to anger, slower to excitement, steadier overall. Not numb, steady. And steadiness is rare. In a world addicted to emotional fireworks, calm feels magnetic. People who once took your reactions for granted start noticing the absence. They feel the vacuum where your emotional energy used to rush toward them. That's when regret creeps in. Not because you're withholding to manipulate, but because you're no longer feeding a dynamic that benefited them more than you. Another practice you need is intentional self-approval. At the end of the day, ask yourself 3 questions. Did I act according to my values? Did I control my reactions? Did I give my attention where it truly mattered? Answer honestly. No self-punishment, just clarity. Seneca encouraged nightly self-examination for this exact reason. You become your own witness. When you validate yourself internally, the hunger for external validation weakens. You stop begging the world to confirm what you already know. Understand this clearly. Emotional self-control doesn't make you invisible, it makes you selective. And selectivity creates gravity. When you're no longer easily provoked, easily pleased, or easily shaken, people recalibrate how they approach you. Some drift away. Let them. Others return, sensing something they can't name. That's not your concern. Your concern is sovereignty over your inner state. So take action, today, not tomorrow. The next time you feel pulled to react, pause. The next time you crave reassurance, withhold the request and give it to yourself instead. The next time your emotions surge, treat them like weather, felt, acknowledged but not obeyed. Reminded himself daily that he could meet whatever came with reason and calm. You can too. Emotional self-control is not a trait you're born with. It's a habit you build. And once built, it changes how the world treats you, without you asking it to. Number 2, quiet self-respect that doesn't demand acknowledgement. Quiet self-respect is one of the rarest forces you can cultivate, and because it makes no noise, most people misunderstand it. You don't announce it, you don't defend it, you don't demand that anyone notice it, you simply live from it. And that's exactly why it unsettles those who once dismissed you. Wrote, "It never ceases to amaze me. We all love ourselves more than other people, but care more about their opinions than our own." Read that again and let it land. The moment you stop outsourcing your worth to other people's reactions, something inside you locks into place. You move differently. You speak less, but with more weight. You stop explaining yourself, not out of bitterness, but because you no longer feel the need to justify your existence. This is where quiet self-respect begins, not as an attitude you perform, but as a posture you inhabit. You feel it when you resist the urge to correct how you're perceived, when you let misunderstandings sit without rushing in to clean them up, when you don't chase closure, validation, or last words. Epictetus was blunt about this. If you want to be respected by others, you must first respect yourself. But what he didn't say explicitly, though it's implied in every Stoic line, is that self-respect loses its power the moment you ask for permission. The discipline here is internal. You decide privately what you tolerate and what you don't. You decide what aligns with your values and what doesn't. And then you act accordingly, without speeches, without ultimatums, without drama. That's silence. It's not emptiness. It's containment. And containment creates gravity. At first, this will feel uncomfortable because you're used to feedback loops. You're used to measuring your worth by how quickly someone responds, how warmly they react, how often they reassure you. Quiet self-respect breaks that addiction. You stop fishing. You stop checking. You stop performing. Seneca warned, "He who depends on another for his happiness is a slave." Let that sting a little, because the truth is, every time you seek acknowledgement, you hand over leverage. And when you withdraw that habit, when you become self-contained, people feel it, even if they can't explain why. There's a subtle panic that arises in those who once felt secure ignoring you. Not because you're punishing them, but because your emotional availability is no longer guaranteed. This is where you need to act deliberately. The practice is simple but not easy. Start by noticing how often you reach outward for confirmation. Catch yourself mid-impulse. Pause, breathe, ask, what would it look like to approve of myself here silently? Then do nothing. Let the discomfort pass. That moment of restraint is training. Called it returning to the citadel within. Every time you do this, you reinforce the idea that your worth is not up for negotiation. Over time, this rewires you. You become steadier, less eager, more selective, and that steadiness reads as confidence, even though it's really just self-trust. You'll also need to clean up your internal dialogue. Quiet self-respect starts in private. If you're harsh with yourself behind closed doors, you'll unconsciously beg others to compensate for it. So practice speaking to yourself with firmness, not cruelty. Not flattery either, just truth. When you mess up, acknowledge it without self-attack. When you do something well, register it without needing applause. Seneca advised, be your own spectator, seek your own applause. Make that a daily habit. At the end of each day, review your actions. Not to judge, but to calibrate. Ask yourself where you acted in alignment with your values and where you didn't. Then adjust. No guilt spirals. No self-praise performances, just quiet correction. As you embody this, you'll notice a shift in how you relate to attention. You no longer rush to fill silence. You don't over-explain your choices. You don't compete for space. You allow people to come to you or not. And here's the paradox. The less you chase acknowledgement, the more compelling your presence becomes, because you're no longer needy for it. Epictetus reminded us, don't explain your philosophy, embody it. That's the essence of this attitude. You don't announce standards, you live them. You don't threaten withdrawal. You simply withdraw when something violates your inner code. To make this real, give yourself a few concrete practices. For the next week, practice deliberate non-reaction. When you feel the urge to clarify, justify, or seek reassurance, delay it by 24 hours. Most of the time, the urge will dissolve. Another practice, speak last, not as a tactic but as a discipline. Let others reveal themselves while you stay grounded. Also, commit to one daily act of self-respect that no one sees. Keep a promise to yourself. End something on time. Walk away from what drains you. These small, invisible wins compound. They teach your nervous system that you are reliable. And once you trust yourself, you stop asking others to do it for you. Understand this clearly. Quiet self-respect is not indifference and it's not coldness. It's precision. It's choosing where your energy goes and refusing to leak it into places that don't deserve it. When people sense that you're no longer trying to prove your value, it forces them to reassess how they treated you. Some will drift away. Let them. Others will circle back, curious, unsettled, drawn to the calm you now carry. Not because you demanded it, but because you became someone who doesn't need to. So start today. Stop negotiating your worth. Stop narrating your intentions. Stop asking to be seen. See yourself. Stand there. Stay there. As said, the best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injustice. Quiet self-respect does exactly that. It changes you first, and everything else follows. Number 3, detachment from outcomes and approval. Detachment from outcomes and approval is one of those attitudes that sounds simple until you actually try to live it. At first, your mind resists. It wants reassurance. It wants signs. It wants validation, applause, closure, certainty. And yet the Stoics were relentless about this point for a reason. Epictetus said, if you want to be invincible, make sure that nothing you depend upon is outside your control. Read that slowly. Let it sink in. Because the moment you stop tying your inner stability to how others respond to you, something powerful happens. You stop leaking energy. You stop performing. You stop waiting. And that shift alone changes how people experience you, whether you ever speak to them again or not. Right now, if you're honest, part of you still wants a reaction. You want acknowledgement that they misjudged you. You want regret to show on their face. You want proof that you mattered. That desire is human, but indulging it keeps you stuck. Approval seeking is invisible submission. Outcome attachment is emotional bargaining. When you detach, you're not becoming cold or indifferent, you're reclaiming ownership of your inner world. Put it plainly, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength. That strength isn't loud, it's quiet, grounded, unshakable, and people feel it without you announcing it. Here's the truth most people miss. Detachment is attractive because it signals abundance of self, not scarcity of attention. When you no longer chase outcomes, your actions become cleaner. You speak without needing agreement. You act without needing applause. You walk away without needing the last word. This is where regret begins, not because you engineered it, but because your absence of need creates contrast. When someone realizes you're no longer available for emotional negotiation, curiosity creeps in. When they sense you're no longer measuring your worth by their reactions, respect starts to grow. Not always immediately, but inevitably. To cultivate this attitude, you must first catch yourself in the act of seeking. Notice when you replay conversations in your head, imagining what you should have said. Notice when you check for signals, hints, or signs. Notice when silence feels uncomfortable. That discomfort is your training ground. Seneca wrote, "We suffer more in imagination than in reality." Every time you resist the urge to chase clarity or validation, you're strengthening a muscle most people never develop. Sit with the unease. Don't numb it, don't distract yourself. Let it pass, it always does. A practical exercise you can start today is a daily approval fast. For one full day, make a quiet commitment to yourself. No explaining, no over-justifying, no fishing for reassurance. Say what needs to be said cleanly. Do what needs to be done fully. Then stop. Observe how often your mind wants to reach outward. Each time it does, bring it back inward. Ask yourself, is this within my control? If the answer is no, release it. Literally exhale as you do. This sounds small, but repeated daily, it rewires how you relate to others and to yourself. Another exercise is outcome-neutral action. Before you do something, send a message, make a decision, set a boundary, pause, and strip away the imagined result. Act as if no reaction will come at all. Ask yourself, would I still do this if no one noticed? If the answer is yes, proceed. If not, wait. This practice aligns you with integrity instead of performance. Epictetus reminded his students, don't explain your philosophy, embody it. When you move without attachment, your presence becomes heavier. You're no longer trying to be chosen, you're choosing yourself. Detachment also means letting go of the timeline. Regret doesn't operate on your schedule. Approval doesn't arrive on demand. When you release the need for immediacy, patience replaces anxiety. You stop scanning the horizon for proof. You become rooted. And rooted people don't chase, they attract. Not because they're trying to, but because their stillness unsettles those who expected dependence. This is not a tactic, it's a transformation. The Stoics were clear about this distinction. Warned against external bargaining, never depend on the admiration of others. There is no strength in it. Read that again. No strength in it. You'll know detachment is taking hold when your silence feels natural instead of forced. When you no longer rehearse explanations. When your focus shifts from how you're perceived to how you're living. This is where your energy consolidates. Instead of being scattered across imagined outcomes, it returns to your body, your breath, your work, your direction. And paradoxically, this is when people begin to wonder about you. Not because you demanded attention, but because you stopped needing it. One more practice, nightly mental subtraction. Before sleep, review the day and identify one expectation you carried that wasn't yours to manage. Let it go consciously. Say to yourself, this was never mine to control. Seneca advised this kind of daily accounting, believing that clarity comes from honest review. Over time, this habit trains your nervous system to relax around uncertainty. You become steady where others become reactive, calm where others become desperate. Understand this clearly. Detachment doesn't guarantee anyone will return. That's not the point. The point is that you no longer hinge your peace on their movement. If they do feel regret, it happens on the edge of your life, not at the center of it. And that's why it carries weight. People chase what doesn't chase back. They question what doesn't explain itself. They reconsider what no longer seeks permission. So take action now. Start withdrawing your worth from external hands. Practice choosing principle over reaction. Train yourself to release what you can't command. This isn't about winning someone back. It's about becoming someone who no longer needs to. And once you reach that place, whether anyone comes chasing or not, you've already won. Number 4, consistent personal standards that don't bend for anyone. Consistent personal standards that don't bend for anyone begin quietly, almost invisibly. They aren't announced. They aren't defended in debates. They're lived. And that's exactly why they carry so much weight. When you decide deeply and without negotiation what you will tolerate and what you will not, something fundamental shifts in how others experience you. Not because you demand respect, but because you no longer chase it. Wrote, "If it is not right, do not do it. If it is not true, do not say it." That sentence sounds simple, but living it requires a spine. It requires you to stop adjusting yourself to keep others comfortable. It requires you to choose inner alignment over external approval again and again, especially when it costs you attention or affection in the short term. You feel the temptation to bend your standards most strongly when someone pulls away, when they fail to value you, when silence appears where effort once existed. That's where most people break. They soften their boundaries. They explain themselves too much. They tolerate what they shouldn't just to keep a connection alive. You're being called to do the opposite. Stoicism teaches you that your character is the only thing truly in your control, not how others feel, not whether they stay, not whether they come back. Epictetus was blunt about this. If you want to be invincible, make yourself indifferent to things you cannot control. When your standards are consistent, you stop negotiating with uncertainty. You stop trying to earn what should be freely given. And paradoxically, that's when regret begins to grow in the minds of those who dismissed you. Consistency matters more than intensity. Anyone can hold a standard once in a dramatic moment. Very few can hold it quietly, repeatedly, without applause. When you don't bend just this once, when you don't make exceptions for charm, nostalgia, or loneliness, you communicate something powerful without saying a word. Your life is governed by principles, not impulses. That's unsettling to people who rely on leverage, emotional swings, or inconsistency. They sense they can't move you the way they used to. Seneca warned, "He who is brave is free." Bravery here isn't confrontation. It's restraint. It's the courage to remain steady when part of you wants to chase, fix, or prove. This steadiness rewires how you see yourself too. You stop asking, "What should I do to keep them?" and start asking, "What action keeps me aligned with who I've chosen to be?" That question changes everything. It removes desperation from your tone, urgency from your behavior, and chaos from your decisions. You become slower to react and quicker to notice. And when you move cleanly. No mixed signals, no backtracking, no hidden agendas. That clarity becomes rare. And what is rare is often chased. Stoicism never promised that holding your standards would feel easy. In fact, it often feels lonely at first. But loneliness with self-respect is lighter than connection built on self-betrayal. Reminded himself, the tranquility that comes when you stop caring what they say, or think, or do, only what you do. Read that again. Let it sink in. Your peace grows in direct proportion to how little you abandon your values for temporary relief. The moment you stop bending, you also stop broadcasting need. And when need disappears, so does the power others had over you. Now, this isn't about rigidity or coldness, it's about coherence. Your words match your actions. Your standards apply whether someone is watching or not. You don't punish. You don't perform distance. You simply choose yourself with consistency. That's what creates regret in those who didn't value you, not because you affection as a tactic, but because you access to a version of yourself that was endlessly flexible. People rarely miss what was chaotic. They miss what was solid. To build this, you need practice, not motivation. Start with a daily written check-in. Each morning, write one sentence answering this. What kind of person am I choosing to be today, regardless of how others behave? Keep it simple. Then at night, reflect briefly. Where did you feel the urge to bend? Where did you hold steady? No judgment, just awareness. Epictetus taught that progress begins with observation. This exercise sharpens that skill. Another practice is intentional pause. When you feel pulled to respond emotionally, don't. Delay your response by an hour a day, whatever feels challenging but manageable. During that pause, ask yourself, if I act from my standards instead of my emotions, what would I do? Write the answer. Often, the urge passes. What remains is clarity. That clarity becomes your compass. You can also rehearse your standards mentally. Stoics called this preparing the mind in advance. Visualize moments where you're tempted to compromise. See yourself choosing restraint, silence, or distance calmly, not angrily, calmly. This conditions your nervous system to stay regulated when it counts. You're training composure, not avoidance. Over time, something subtle happens. You stop needing closure from people who couldn't meet you where you stand. You stop explaining your boundaries. You stop proving your worth. And in that quiet strength, others feel the absence of control they once had. Regret isn't loud. It shows up as curiosity, second-guessing, and a sudden desire to re-enter your orbit. Whether they do or not becomes irrelevant, because by then, your standards aren't a strategy. They're simply who you are. Remember this above all, consistent personal standards aren't there to make anyone chase you. They exist to make you unshakable. Any regret that follows is a byproduct, not the goal. As wrote, waste no more time arguing about what a good person should be. Be one. Choose that today. Then choose it again tomorrow. And again. That repetition is what changes everything. Number 5. Calm indifference toward disrespect or neglect. Calm indifference toward disrespect or neglect is one of the most misunderstood attitudes, yet it is also one of the most powerful. Most people think power comes from reacting, explaining, confronting, or demanding recognition. It doesn't. Power comes from deciding what deserves your energy and what does not. The Stoics understood this deeply. Wrote, choose not to be harmed and you won't feel harmed. Don't feel harmed and you haven't been. That sentence alone can change the way you move through the world if you let it. When someone disrespects you or treats you as if you are optional, the instinct is to correct them, to prove your worth, to demand fairness. But the moment you do that, you've already handed them control. Calm indifference is the refusal to participate in that exchange at all. When you practice this attitude, you stop advertising your emotional buttons. You stop showing people where to press. You don't become cold or bitter, you become selective. You recognize that not every action deserves a reaction and not every silence needs to be filled. Epictetus warned, if you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid. Calm indifference often looks like weakness to those who don't understand it. They expect agitation. They expect pursuit. They expect emotional noise. When they get none of that, something unsettling happens inside them. Your absence of reaction becomes a mirror, and mirrors make people uncomfortable. This attitude is not about pretending you don't care. You do care, but you care about the right things. You care about your principles, your self-respect, your inner order. Seneca wrote, "He who is brave is free." Calm indifference is a form of bravery. It takes strength to sit with discomfort without lashing out. It takes discipline to remain steady when ignored or minimized. But every time you do, you reinforce something vital inside you. The knowledge that your worth is not negotiated through someone else's attention. You have to understand this clearly. Chasing clarity from someone who disrespects or neglects you is a losing move. Not because they are evil or malicious, but because attention gained through pressure is unstable. The Stoics believe that dependence is the root of suffering. When your peace depends on how someone treats you, you are no longer free. Calm indifference cuts that dependency at the root. It says, without saying anything, I am not available for this dynamic. And that statement carries more weight than 1,000 emotional conversations ever could. Adopting this attitude requires daily practice. It doesn't happen overnight because your nervous system has been trained to seek validation. So start small. The first exercise is awareness. When you feel the urge to react, to explain yourself, to seek reassurance, to confront, pause, just pause. Take a slow breath and ask yourself one question: is this within my control? If it's not, let it go. Reminded himself daily, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. That strength grows every time you choose restraint over reaction. Another practice is intentional silence. Silence is not passive, it is deliberate. When you feel disrespected, resist the urge to fill the space. Let the quiet do the work. Silence forces others to sit with their own behavior. You don't need to teach lessons or make points. Your composure becomes the message. This is not about playing games. It's about refusing to abandon yourself for the sake of being acknowledged. You should also train emotional neutrality through journaling. At the end of the day, write down moments where you felt overlooked or dismissed. Don't dramatize them, describe them plainly. Then write how you responded and how you could have responded with calm indifference. This trains your mind to see alternatives. Over time, you'll notice the emotional charge weakening. What once felt personal starts to feel irrelevant. That's growth. Calm indifference also requires you to detach from outcomes. You are not indifferent to your values, but you are indifferent to whether others validate them. Epictetus said, "Make the best use of what is in your power and take the rest as it happens." When you live this way, something shifts. You stop waiting for regret from others. And paradoxically, that's often when it appears. Not because you demanded it, but because people are drawn toward what does not chase them. You must also clean up your inner dialogue. If someone neglects you and your mind immediately starts negotiating, maybe I should try harder, maybe I should explain myself, interrupt that pattern. Replace it with a simple truth: I do not need to be chosen to be complete. Repeat it until it feels normal. The Stoics practiced mental rehearsal for adversity. You can do the same. Imagine being ignored. Imagine remaining calm. Imagine your life continuing uninterrupted. This reduces fear and builds emotional immunity. This attitude changes your posture in every area of life. You stop performing. You stop overextending. You stop rewarding poor treatment with increased effort. Instead, you conserve your energy for what aligns with you. Seneca wrote, "It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste much of it." Calm indifference is the refusal to waste emotional time on what does not respect you. Take action today. Decide where you will no longer react. Decide what behaviors you will meet with quiet distance instead of explanation. Practice responding slower. Practice saying less. Practice being unbothered, not as a mask, but as a discipline. Over time, this attitude reshapes how others perceive you, but more importantly, it reshapes how you perceive yourself. You don't need to announce your boundaries when your behavior enforces them. You don't need to demand respect when your presence assumes it. Calm indifference is not about revenge or proving a point. It is about alignment. And when you are aligned, you become difficult to ignore and impossible to control. Carry this with you. Practice it daily. Let your calm speak. Let your absence of reaction do the work. And remember what knew centuries ago: The best revenge is not to be like your enemy. Number 6, focus on self-mastery rather than being understood. There's a quiet power that shows up the moment you stop trying to be understood. Most people don't realize how much energy they waste explaining themselves, defending their motives, clarifying their intentions, hoping someone will finally get it. You've probably felt that pull too, the urge to correct the story others have in their head about you. But Stoicism cuts straight through that impulse. Epictetus put it plainly: if you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid. That line stings at first, but sit with it. It's not telling you to shrink. It's telling you to redirect your focus. The moment you stop chasing understanding, you reclaim control. And control, real control, begins with self-mastery. Self-mastery is choosing command over chaos. It's deciding that your inner world matters more than the shifting opinions outside you. When you obsess over being understood, you hand your peace to people who may never be capable of seeing you clearly. You end up reacting instead of acting. You adjust instead of anchoring. And slowly, without noticing, you train yourself to live for an audience that isn't even paying attention. Warned against this trap when he wrote, "I do my duty, other things trouble me not." That's the posture. Do your duty to yourself. Let misunderstanding exist without treating it like an emergency. Here's the uncomfortable truth. People don't regret losing you because you explained yourself better. They regret it when they feel your absence, when your energy is no longer available for debate, justification, or emotional labor. When you shift your attention inward, toward discipline, restraint, and growth, you become less accessible. Not cold, not bitter, just grounded. And grounded people are magnetic because they are no longer begging to be seen. They are busy becoming solid. Think about how often your emotions pull you into unnecessary conversations in your head, replaying moments, imagining what you should have said, wishing someone understood your side. Seneca warned about this kind of mental leakage. We suffer more often in imagination than in reality. Self-mastery begins when you catch yourself in that spiral and choose differently. Instead of rehearsing explanations, you train composure. Instead of clarifying yourself to others, you clarify your standards to yourself. This is not passive. It's disciplined withdrawal. And discipline always creates distance, distance that others feel later as loss. To live this attitude, you need habits, not slogans. Start with emotional containment. When you feel the urge to explain, pause. Don't suppress the feeling, observe it. Ask yourself, what am I trying to gain right now? Respect, validation, relief. Then ask a harder question. Can I give that to myself through action instead of words? Most of the time, the answer is yes. You don't need to convince anyone of your worth when your behavior is aligned with it. Another practice is deliberate silence. Not dramatic silence, calm silence. The kind hinted at when he wrote, "Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be one." Silence isn't absence, it's compression. It concentrates your energy. Try this exercise. For 1 week, remove the impulse to correct misunderstandings that don't affect your integrity. Let people be wrong. Notice how much time and mental space opens up. Use that space to sharpen a skill, refine your routine, or strengthen your body and mind. You'll feel resistance at first. That's your old identity begging to be reassured. Don't feed it. Self-mastery also means governing your reactions. When you no longer seek to be understood, you stop taking things personally. Words lose their hook, opinions lose their sting. Epictetus reminded his students, it is not things themselves that disturb us, but our judgments about them. Train yourself to catch the judgment. When someone misreads you, don't rush to fix it. Label the sensation. Breathe. Let it pass. This is a muscle. The more you practice, the stronger it gets. Now here's the paradox. When you stop explaining yourself, people start watching you more closely. Not because you're trying to provoke them, but because your calm creates contrast. You're no longer reactive. You're no longer available on demand. You're living from an internal code. and people always feel the difference between someone who moves from need and someone who moves from principle. Seneca wrote, "The wise man is self-sufficient. Self-sufficiency doesn't mean isolation. It means your center of gravity is inside you." Build rituals that reinforce this. Each morning, write down one thing you will control today and one thing you will deliberately ignore. Control your effort. Ignore the need for recognition. Control your conduct. Ignore assumptions. At night, review yourself, not others. Practice this constantly, asking whether he acted with justice, restraint, and clarity. That's the scoreboard that matters. There will be moments when you're tempted to break this discipline, when silence feels like weakness, when not being understood feels unfair. That's when you remind yourself why you're doing this. You're not trying to win arguments. You're building a self that doesn't need them. You're becoming someone whose presence is felt more in absence than in explanation. Someone who doesn't chase closure because they've already closed the loop internally. And this is where regret is born on the other side. Not because you demanded it, not because you announced your growth, but because you moved on quietly. You mastered yourself instead of managing perceptions. You invested in depth instead of noise. People don't chase what pleads. They chase what walks away whole. So choose self-mastery today. Choose the harder path of restraint, the quieter path of discipline. Let misunderstanding exist. Let silence do its work. As Epictetus said, first say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do. Do that consistently and you won't need to be understood. You'll be undeniable. Number 7. Silence and restraint, where explanation is expected. Silence and restraint feel uncomfortable at first, especially when someone expects an explanation from you. You can almost feel the pressure in your chest, the urge to justify yourself, to clarify, to defend, to be understood. But this is exactly where your power lives. The Stoics understood this deeply. Reminded himself, you always own the option of having no opinion. Read that again. No opinion, no explanation, no performance. When you stop rushing to fill the silence, something subtle but profound happens. The dynamic shifts. You are no longer reacting. You are choosing. When someone didn't value you before, they were used to access. Access to your thoughts, your emotions, your reassurance, your energy. Silence cuts that supply, not out of bitterness but out of self-respect. And restraint ensures that whatever you do say, if you ever say anything at all, actually matters. Most people talk themselves into being overlooked. They over-explain their intentions, overshare their feelings, overcorrect misunderstandings that were never asked to be corrected. You don't realize it in the moment, but every unnecessary explanation quietly lowers your perceived value. Epictetus warned, if you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid. In other words, let them misunderstand you. Let them guess. Let them sit with uncertainty. You don't need to rush in and save them from their own assumptions. Silence isn't passive. It's not weakness. It's restraint in motion. It's the discipline to pause where you once chased clarity. And restraint is what separates emotional control from emotional chaos. When you don't immediately respond, when you don't rush to explain why you acted the way you did, you're signaling something powerful. You are not governed by their expectations. You're governed by your principles. Seneca wrote, "He who is brave is free." And bravery here looks like staying quiet when your ego wants to speak. What makes this attitude so unsettling to those who once dismissed you is that silence removes predictability. They no longer know how to pull you back into familiar patterns. You're no longer performing for approval or scrambling to repair perceptions. You're grounded, still, observant, and people feel that shift before they understand it. The absence of explanation creates space. Space invites curiosity. Curiosity turns into regret. Not because you tried to provoke it, but because you stopped preventing it. You need to understand this clearly. Explanations are often given to relieve your anxiety, not to improve the situation. When you restrain yourself, you're training a new habit. You're teaching yourself that discomfort won't kill you, that silence won't erase you, that not being immediately understood doesn't mean you've lost value. In fact, it often does the opposite. Advised, do not waste what remains of your life in speculating about others. Silence cuts off that waste. It brings your attention back to what you can control, your actions, your standards, your pace. There's a quiet confidence that grows when you stop narrating yourself. You begin to move differently, more deliberately, less emotionally reactive. And this is where regret is born, not from your words, but from your absence of them. When you don't explain, others are forced to confront the gap you left behind. And gaps invite reflection. Reflection invites longing. Longing invites pursuit. You didn't demand it. You didn't ask for it. You simply stopped interfering with the natural consequences of your self-control. To live this attitude, you need to practice restraint intentionally, not just when it feels easy. Start small. When you feel the impulse to clarify yourself unnecessarily, pause, count your breath. Ask yourself, is this explanation serving my values or my insecurity? Most of the time, the answer will surprise you. Another exercise, commit to delayed responses. Not as a tactic, but as discipline. Let your nervous system settle before you speak. Seneca believed that time reveals the truth of emotions. Give yourself that time. You can also practice silent observation. When someone presses you for reasons, for emotional labor, for reassurance you didn't offer, say less than you normally would. Not coldly, calmly, simply. Let your tone carry steadiness instead of words carrying defense. Over time, this trains you to trust your presence more than your explanations, and that trust is contagious. Remember, Stoicism isn't about suppressing emotion, it's about mastering response. Silence and restraint are not about punishing others, they're about reclaiming yourself. When you no longer feel compelled to explain, you've crossed an internal threshold. You've moved from needing validation to embodying self-respect. And that shift is impossible to ignore. So start today. Notice where you over-explain. Catch the moment before you justify. Choose stillness instead. Let silence do the work you've been exhausting yourself trying to do with words. As Epictetus said, first say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do. Be the person who doesn't chase understanding, because your composure speaks louder than any explanation ever could. Number 8, selective availability rooted in purpose, not scarcity. Selective availability, when it's rooted in purpose and not scarcity, changes something deep inside you. It's not about disappearing to provoke anxiety or withholding yourself to seem important. That's insecurity wearing a clever mask. Stoicism cuts through that immediately. Epictetus was blunt about it. If you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid. In other words, stop managing appearances. Stop trying to be chosen. Start choosing how you spend your life. When your availability is shaped by purpose, you're no longer reacting to who notices you or who doesn't. You're acting in alignment with what actually matters to you, and that shift is impossible not to feel, both by you and by others. Right now, ask yourself honestly, how much of your time is given away without intention? How often do you say yes just to avoid discomfort, silence, or the feeling of being left out? That's not kindness. That's scarcity. Warned against this inner disorder when he wrote, "If you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it." When you make yourself constantly available, it's often because you're estimating other people's attention as more valuable than your own direction. Stoicism asks you to flip that. Your time is not a bargaining chip. It's your life in minutes. Selective availability grounded in purpose begins the moment you decide that your days have a spine, something solid running through them, a direction that doesn't wobble based on who texts back or who goes quiet. Seneca put it perfectly. It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste much of it. Purpose doesn't need to be dramatic. It needs to be deliberate. When your schedule reflects your values, even imperfectly, you stop leaking energy. You become calmer, slower to react, harder to pull off center. And paradoxically, this is when people who once overlooked you start feeling the absence they never noticed before. There's a subtle confidence that comes from being unavailable for the right reasons, not rushed, not defensive, not explained away. You don't announce it, you don't justify it. You simply live as if your inner work matters, because it does. Epictetus again, first say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do. Selective availability is the external consequence of an internal decision. You're no longer organizing your time around approval. You're organizing it around becoming someone you respect. Notice how different that feels in your body. Scarcity-based absence is tense. It's watchful. It keeps checking the door to see who's coming back. Purpose-based absence is relaxed, grounded. You're not hopping to be missed. You're busy being whole. And that's exactly why regret forms on the other side. Not because you vanished, but because you stayed and grew without them. Here, where you take this out of theory and into habit, start with a simple daily audit. At the end of each day, write down where your time actually went. Not where you planned it to go, where it went. Then ask one Stoic question: was this within my control and did it serve my character? Use versions of this reflection constantly. This isn't about guilt, it's about clarity. Awareness precedes discipline. Next, practice intentional pauses. When a request comes in, any request, don't respond immediately. Not to manipulate, to consult your purpose. Count to 10, take one breath. Ask yourself, does saying yes here strengthen or dilute the man I'm becoming? That pause is powerful. It retrains your nervous system. It teaches you that urgency is often an illusion. Seneca warned, "He who is everywhere is nowhere." Let that line follow you through your day. Another exercise: define 3 non-negotiable blocks of time each week. These are appointments with yourself. No explanations required. During these blocks, you work, train, study, reflect. Whatever aligns with your direction, protect them quietly. You don't need to defend them. The Stoics believed self-respect was built through consistent action, not argument. Each time you honor these blocks, you reinforce a new identity, someone whose time has weight. Expect discomfort at first. That's normal. Scarcity has a withdrawal phase. You may feel restless. You may feel the urge to fill the silence. Don't sit with it. Epictetus reminded his students that progress feels strange before it feels natural. No man is free who is not master of himself. Mastery doesn't roar, it settles. Over time, something shifts. You stop checking whether you're valued because your days already answer that question. You're no longer overly available, yet you're not cold. You're present when you choose to be. That choice is everything. It communicates boundaries without speeches. It signals depth without performance. And yes, it awakens regret in those who once assumed your attention was endless. Not because you love, but because you access to a version of yourself that was too generous with what should have been guarded. Let this sink in. Selective availability is not about them chasing you. That's a side effect, not the goal. The goal is alignment, tranquility. The quiet confidence described when he wrote, "Nowhere you can go is more peaceful, more free of interruptions than your own soul." When your availability comes from that place, you don't need to chase or hide. You simply move forward. So take action today. Choose one small boundary, one intentional no, 1 hour reclaimed. Don't announce it, live it, then repeat tomorrow. This is how purpose becomes visible. This is how regret forms in those who didn't value you. And this is how you stop needing their realization to validate your worth. Number 9, inner fulfillment that makes external attention irrelevant. There comes a quiet moment, almost uncomfortable at first, when you realize that the hunger for attention was never about them. It was about the space inside you that you hadn't fully occupied yet. The Stoics spoke of this plainly. Wrote, "Nowhere can a man find a quieter or more untroubled retreat than in his own soul." Read that again, slowly. When you build that retreat within yourself, something strange happens. The noise outside loses its power. You stop checking who noticed you, who ignored you, who failed to choose you. Not because you've given up, but because you've finally arrived somewhere deeper. Inner fulfillment is not indifference, it's alignment. It's when your actions, values, and self-respect start working together instead of pulling you apart. When that happens, external validation becomes optional, not necessary. You no longer lean forward, waiting for someone else to confirm your worth. You sit back, grounded, calm, and that shift alone is enough to disturb anyone who once assumed your attention was guaranteed. Epictetus said it best. If you want to be invincible, make sure that you never enter a contest where the winning depends on things outside your control. Chasing approval is one of those contests. Inner fulfillment is how you quietly walk away from it. This attitude demands action from you. Not tomorrow, not when you feel ready. Now, you start by reclaiming your mornings and evenings, those moments when the mind is most impressionable. Before you reach for your phone, sit with yourself. Ask a simple question: what do I want to embody today? Not achieved, not impressed. Embody strength, discipline, calm. Choose one. Let it guide your decisions. Seneca warned, if a man knows not which port he sails, no wind is favorable. Fulfillment grows when your days stop drifting. As you practice this, you'll notice a subtle but powerful change in how you move through the world. You speak less but with more weight. You listen without the hidden agenda of being liked. You stop explaining yourself unnecessarily. These aren't tactics, they're symptoms. Symptoms of a man who is no longer negotiating with the world for his sense of self. And paradoxically, this is what draws attention back toward you. Not because you chased it, but because you stopped needing it. Now let's be practical. Inner fulfillment doesn't come from vague affirmations. It comes from repeated acts of self-respect. One exercise you must adopt is voluntary discomfort. The Stoics practiced this deliberately. Choose small, controlled challenges daily. Do the difficult thing you've been avoiding. Finish what you start. Sit with silence instead of distraction. When you train yourself to endure mild discomfort by choice, you build a quiet confidence that no compliment can give you. Reminded himself, the impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. Every resisted impulse strengthens you. Another practice is removing mental dependence. Watch how often your mood shifts based on someone else's response or lack of one. Catch it. Don't judge it, just notice. Then remind yourself this reaction is optional. You don't need to suppress emotion, you need to stop obeying it blindly. Epictetus again, it's not things that disturb us but our judgments about them. Fulfillment grows when you choose your judgments carefully. There will be moments when your old patterns try to pull you back, when silence from others feels loud, when being overlooked stings. Don't run from that feeling, sit with it, breathe through it, let it pass without action. This is crucial, because every time you don't react, you weaken the old need for validation. You teach your nervous system a new language, one of self-sufficiency, and over time, this becomes your default state. You should also build a private standard, a personal code that no one else needs to see or approve of. Decide what behaviors you respect in yourself and which ones you no longer tolerate. Keep this code simple, clear, non-negotiable. Seneca wrote, associate with people who are likely to improve you. But first, you must become someone you respect associating with. When you live by your own standard, regret forms naturally in those who once underestimated you. Not because you proved them wrong, but because you stopped caring whether they were right. Here's another exercise, nightly reflection. Before sleep, review your day without drama. Ask yourself 3 questions. Did I act in alignment with my values today? Or did I give my power away emotionally? What will I do differently tomorrow? Write the answers if you can. This isn't self-criticism, it's self-leadership. Did this relentlessly. Fulfillment isn't found in intensity, it's found in consistency. As this attitude takes root, you'll feel a strange freedom. You'll notice that you're less available not out of arrogance but out of self-prioritization. Your time feels valuable because you treat it that way. Your energy feels contained, focused. People sense this. They always do. And those who once failed to value you often mistake your inner peace for distance or mystery or challenge. Let them. You're not here to manage perceptions anymore. The deepest truth is this. When your inner world becomes rich, the outer world loses its leverage. You stop chasing because you're no longer empty-handed. You carry yourself differently. You respond instead of react. You choose instead of plead. And that choice, made quietly daily, is what makes external attention irrelevant. Ironically, it's also what makes it return. So start today. Strip your habits down to what strengthens you. Guard your attention like a scarce resource. Practice discomfort. Reflect honestly. Anchor yourself in Stoic discipline. And remember this final line from Epictetus. First say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do. When you live that way, regret chases you, but it never catches you. If there's one thing Stoicism teaches you, it's this. The moment you stop chasing validation, your presence becomes impossible to ignore. You don't need to prove your worth. You don't need to explain yourself. And you certainly don't need to beg to be chosen. When you embody these attitudes, something subtle but powerful happens. Those who once overlooked you begin to feel your absence, your growth, your calm strength. Remember, regret isn't created by confrontation. It's created by contrast, by the quiet realization that they lost access to someone who was grounded, self-respecting, and no longer available for manipulation or indifference. You didn't change to punish them. You changed because you finally chose yourself. And that choice is magnetic. So take a moment after this video and reflect. Where are you still giving energy to people who haven't earned it? Where are you explaining, chasing, or shrinking when Stoicism asks you to stand firm and composed? Let go of what no longer aligns with your self-respect. Focus on your discipline, your purpose, and your inner peace. If this video resonated with you, stay with this path. Rewatch these principles, apply them quietly, and watch how life and people respond. Subscribe for more Stoic wisdom, and remember, the most powerful revenge is becoming untouchable. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength. What if I told you that some of the confusion you've experienced with women wasn't random, wasn't bad luck, and wasn't because you did something wrong, but because you were never taught what they are quietly struggling to hide? Most men are trained to look for confidence, attraction, and emotional certainty. But beneath the surface, there are psychological weak points, subtle insecurities, internal conflicts, and silent fears that rarely get spoken about. Not because they don't exist, but because exposing them would shatter the image. And here's the uncomfortable truth. The men who understand these hidden dynamics don't chase, don't beg, and don't. They stay calm. They stay grounded. And without trying, they become magnetic. In this video, you're going to learn 9 psychological weaknesses women try to hide from men, not to manipulate, not to exploit, but to see clearly, to stop taking things personally, to stop reacting emotionally, to move with quiet confidence instead of confusion. Watch this video till the very end, because the final points tie everything together. And once you see the full picture, you'll never interpret female behavior the same way again. Number 1. Fear of emotional vulnerability. Fear of emotional vulnerability is rarely loud. It doesn't announce itself. It hides behind control, sarcasm, detachment, testing, and emotional restraint. And the more intense the feelings, the stronger the urge to guard them. This fear isn't weakness in the way most people think of weakness. It's protection. It's the instinct to stay composed when exposure feels risky. And if you don't understand this, you'll misread behavior, react poorly, or try to force openness, destroying attraction in the process. Here, what you need to grasp first. Vulnerability feels like loss of leverage. When emotions are revealed, control feels compromised. And for many women, emotional exposure carries the risk of being judged, dismissed, or emotionally overpowered. So instead of opening directly, emotions are filtered, disguised, delayed, or tested. This is where men often fail. They interpret guardedness as indifference or manipulation, then respond with pressure, withdrawal, or overcompensation. None of that works. Stoicism teaches something radically different: strength through steadiness, not intrusion. Wrote, the soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. When fear dominates the inner world, behavior reflects caution. Emotional vulnerability threatens the internal order, so defenses rise. Your job is not to tear those defenses down. Your job is to remain composed enough that vulnerability feels unnecessary to fear. And that starts with you mastering your own emotional exposure first. You must understand this clearly. Emotional safety is not created through reassurance, persuasion, or emotional intensity. It's created through consistency and calm presence. When you stay grounded, when you don't react sharply to emotional shifts, when you don't demand openness or punish restraint, you remove the perceived danger. Vulnerability doesn't open in response to pressure. It opens when there is no pressure at all. Epictetus said, "If you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid." In this context, it means letting go of the urge to extract emotional truth. You don't interrogate feelings. You don't chase confessions. You don't push for clarity when uncertainty is present. You hold your frame. You regulate yourself. And in doing so, you communicate something powerful without words. Emotions are welcome, but never required for validation. Fear of vulnerability also feeds into emotional testing. When emotions are risky, they're revealed indirectly, through contradiction, through mood shifts, through distance. These aren't invitations to react, they're checks. Will you stay the same? Will you become reactive? Will you lose yourself trying to understand me? Every time you remain steady, the fear weakens. Every time you become emotionally erratic, it strengthens. Stoicism teaches emotional discipline not as suppression, but as clarity. Seneca warned, "We suffer more often in imagination than in reality." Fear of vulnerability thrives in imagined outcomes: rejection, judgment, loss of power. When you don't add fuel to those imagined dangers, when you don't dramatize emotional moments, you collapse the fear silently. You show that openness does not lead to chaos. Now here's the part that requires action from you. You cannot expect emotional vulnerability from others if you haven't mastered your own. Not oversharing, not emotional dumping, but self-honesty without neediness. When you are comfortable sitting with your own emotions, without urgency, without seeking reassurance, you become non-threatening. You're not hungry for emotional access, and that lack of hunger is deeply stabilizing. Start with this exercise. For the next week, notice every moment you feel the urge to push for emotional clarity, the desire to label, define, resolve, or extract meaning. Pause, breathe. Let the moment exist without interference. This trains restraint, and restraint communicates safety far more effectively than words ever could. Another exercise: practice emotional neutrality in moments of uncertainty, not coldness, not distance, calm acceptance. Repeat internally, "I don't need this moment to go any particular way." That mindset removes pressure instantly. Vulnerability cannot emerge when it's being hunted, but it often emerges when it's allowed to arrive on its own terms. Reminded himself, be tolerant with others and strict with yourself. Apply that here. Be tolerant of emotional guardedness, strict with your reactions. You don't punish distance. You don't reward drama. You don't overvalue emotional access. You value alignment, presence, and integrity. Over time, this recalibrates the dynamic. Fear dissolves when there is nothing to defend against. You also need to abandon the fantasy that vulnerability is always verbal. Emotional openness often shows up as comfort, presence, softness, or ease, not confessions. When you expect vulnerability to look a certain way, you miss it entirely. Stoicism trains perception. You observe without demanding interpretation. You let meaning reveal itself gradually. Another practical habit to build: stop trying to emotionally fix moments. If something feels tense or withdrawn, don't rush to smooth it over. Sit in the silence. Maintain your posture internally and externally. This is difficult at first. Your nervous system will crave resolution, but this is exactly where growth happens. Stillness invites trust. Epictetus said, "Don't explain your philosophy, embody it." Emotional safety works the same way. You don't talk about openness. You embody stability. You don't chase emotional truth. You make emotional truth unnecessary to prove worth. That paradox is powerful. The less you need emotional access, the safer it feels to offer it. And here's the final shift you must make. Stop seeing fear of vulnerability as something to overcome. It's something to respect. Respect dissolves fear faster than force ever could. When you respect emotional boundaries, you become someone worth opening up to, not because you asked, but because you didn't need to. Your task is simple but not easy. Regulate yourself. Stay consistent. Act from principle, not emotion. Let vulnerability come to you not because you earned it through effort, but because your presence made fear unnecessary. That is Stoic strength. Quiet, grounded, unshakable. Number 2, dependence on external validation. Dependence on external validation is one of the most quietly powerful forces shaping behavior, and the reason it stays hidden is because it often wears the mask of confidence. You see poise, polish, charm. What you don't see is the constant internal calibration. How am I being seen right now? Am I still desired? Am I still chosen? That need for reassurance doesn't announce itself loudly. It hums in the background, influencing reactions, moods, and decisions. And the moment you understand this dynamic, not to exploit it, but to stop being pulled into it, you regain control of your own center. Here, where you come in, the danger isn't that others seek validation. The danger is when you become a supplier of it unconsciously, when your tone shifts to soothe, when your actions subtly adjust to maintain approval, when you reward insecurity with overtension. The Stoics warned against this long ago. Epictetus said, "If you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid." What he was pointing to is radical independence from opinion. The moment you stop managing how you're perceived, you stop feeding the validation loop. And when that loop isn't fed, its power weakens. External validation works like a drug. It feels good briefly, then demands another hit. Compliments, attention, reassurance, none of these are bad in themselves, but dependence changes the dynamic. It turns interactions into transactions. Approval is exchanged for behavior. And when you unknowingly participate in that exchange, you lose leverage without realizing it. Stoicism teaches you to step out of that economy entirely. You don't withhold approval to punish. You simply stop overgiving it to regulate emotions that aren't yours to manage. Wrote, "I do what is mine to do, the rest does not disturb me." Read that slowly. That's the mindset you need. Your role is not to validate, rescue, or stabilize someone else's self-image. Your role is to act with clarity and integrity. When you do that, something interesting happens. The need for validation becomes visible because it's no longer being constantly met, and visibility changes behavior. This doesn't require coldness. It requires restraint, calm presence, emotional self-sufficiency. When you're grounded in yourself, you don't rush to reassure. You don't over-explain. You don't inflate egos or shrink yourself to maintain harmony. You stay steady. And steadiness is disarming. It forces others to confront their own inner noise instead of outsourcing it to you. Here's a hard truth most people avoid. Validation-seeking thrives on inconsistency. If your attention fluctuates based on moods or reactions, it keeps the cycle alive. But if your energy remains even warm but not reactive, attentive but not chasing, the dependency loses its grip. Seneca captured this perfectly when he said, "He who depends on himself alone is armed against fortune." Self-dependence is contagious. When you embody it, you invite others to find it too, or reveal that they can't. Now let's bring this inward, because Stoicism always starts with you. Ask yourself where you still seek validation. Where do you want to be approved of, admired, chosen? Be honest. This isn't about shame. It's about freedom. Every unexamined need becomes a handle someone else can grab. The Stoic path is about removing handles, about becoming smooth where others expect hooks. A simple practice. For the next week, notice every impulse to seek reassurance, verbally or emotionally. Don't suppress it. Just pause, breathe. Let it pass without acting on it. You're teaching your nervous system that approval is optional, not oxygen. This alone will sharpen your presence. Another exercise: reduce unnecessary explanations. When you explain too much, you're often seeking agreement, not clarity. Practice saying less. Let your decisions stand without decoration. This builds inner authority, and inner authority is felt immediately, even if it's never named. You should also practice giving validation only when it aligns with your values, not when it's demanded by insecurity. That distinction matters. Authentic recognition strengthens connection. Automatic reassurance weakens it. Reminded himself, the tranquility that comes when you stop caring what they say or think or do. That tranquility is what shifts dynamics effortlessly. As you do this, you'll notice something subtle. You'll feel less urgency, less pressure to manage emotions that aren't yours. You'll stop reacting to fluctuations in attention or mood. And in that stillness, power returns to you, not power over others, but power over yourself. Dependence on external validation thrives in noise. Stoicism thrives in quiet. Choose quiet. Choose self-sufficiency. Choose to be the one who doesn't need to be constantly seen to feel solid. When you live from that place, you don't trigger insecurity, you reveal it. And revelation is the first step toward real strength, for you and for anyone watching closely enough to learn. Number 3, anxiety, about aging and desirability. Anxiety about aging and desirability sits beneath the surface more often than it's admitted, and you can feel it without anyone saying a word. It's quiet, persistent, and rarely spoken directly. What matters for you is not judging it, fixing it, or reacting to it emotionally, but understanding how it operates and how your own composure changes the dynamic entirely. Aging represents loss of control over time, attention, and perceived value, and when desirability feels threatened, insecurity doesn't announce itself. It hides. It reshapes behavior. It looks like heightened sensitivity, sudden defensiveness, or an unspoken need to feel chosen again and again. When you recognize this without exploiting it or fearing it, you step into a position of calm authority. Stoicism teaches you to see things as they are, not as your emotions color them. Wrote, observe constantly that all things take place by change, and accustom yourself to consider that the nature of the universe loves nothing so much as to change the things which are. Aging is change. Fighting it creates anxiety. Accepting it creates peace. When someone struggles internally with fading desirability, they're resisting change, trying to freeze a moment in time where validation felt effortless. Your role is not to reassure compulsively or withdraw coldly, but to remain grounded in your own self-respect. Anxiety feeds on instability. Calm dissolves it. Here, where you must be careful. If you react by overvalidating, you reinforce the fear. If you react by distancing emotionally, you amplify it. Stoicism doesn't choose either extreme, it chooses steadiness. You don't need to comment on age, beauty, or worth. You don't need to compete with time. You simply stay present, composed, and non-reactive. That alone communicates something powerful. Value is not scarce here. You are not frantic. You are not chasing youth, nor are you threatened by its absence. That unspoken message is stabilizing. Epictetus said, "Don't explain your philosophy, embody it." This applies here more than anywhere. When you embody calm acceptance of time, you become a mirror. People feel their own tension when standing next to your ease. And ease is attractive because it suggests safety, not emotional dependency, but emotional stability. Anxiety about aging often seeks reassurance through attention spikes, emotional tests, or subtle comparisons. When you don't take the bait, when you don't rush to soothe or withdraw to punish, you show strength without cruelty. You also need to understand this. Desirability anxiety is not about age itself. It's about relevance, about being seen, about mattering. When someone feels their window closing, they may unconsciously try to regain leverage. Stoicism teaches you not to play leverage games. Seneca wrote, "He suffers more than necessary, who suffers before it is necessary." Anticipated loss causes more pain than loss itself. Your consistency, your calm pace, your refusal to escalate emotional exchanges, these things prevent imagined fears from becoming real conflict. Your responsibility is internal discipline. Ask yourself, do you react to insecurity with impatience? Do you feel the urge to prove dominance, youth, or superiority? That urge reveals your own fear of time. Stoicism demands that you confront that first. Aging applies to you as well. Your power comes from accepting that fully. When you stop measuring worth through attention or novelty, you become immune to manipulation rooted in those fears. Now let's turn this into action. First exercise, practice neutral presence. For the next week, notice when conversations drift toward validation-seeking energy. Don't label it, don't correct it. Simply remain steady. Same tone, same pace, same emotional temperature. This trains you to stop reacting to anxiety and start dissolving it through consistency. Second exercise, audit your own relationship with aging. Write down what you fear losing over time. Be honest. Status, strength, attraction, control. Then write what remains untouched by time: character, discipline, values, self-command. Reminded himself, very little is needed to make a happy life. It is all within yourself, in your way of thinking. When you internalize this, you stop projecting fear onto others. Third exercise, detach desirability from urgency. Move slower in decisions. Speak when necessary, not to fill space. Allow silence to exist without rushing to manage it. Anxiety hates silence because silence exposes insecurity. Calm people are comfortable there. Become one of them. There's also a deeper layer here. When anxiety about aging is hidden, it often surfaces as control, over narratives, over emotional tone, over perceived competition. Stoicism teaches you to relinquish control over what you cannot command. Epictetus said, "Make the best use of what is in your power and take the rest as it happens." You cannot stop time. You cannot manage another person's fears. What you can do is refuse to let those fears dictate your behavior. When you stay aligned, something subtle happens. The anxiety has no mirror, no fuel, no reaction. And without reaction, it softens. Not because you confronted it, but because you didn't reward it. This is emotional leadership without force. You must also resist the temptation to feel superior for noticing this weakness. Stoicism rejects arrogance as much as insecurity. Compassion without indulgence is the balance. You see the fear, but you don't kneel to it. You don't exploit it either. You remain yourself. that integrity is felt immediately. Seneca wrote, "No man is more unhappy than he who never faces adversity, for he is not permitted to prove himself." Anxiety about aging is adversity of the mind. How you respond proves who you are. If you respond with steadiness, patience, and grounded confidence, you elevate the entire interaction. You create an environment where fear loses relevance. The final exercise is simple but difficult. Choose one habit that reinforces your own timeless value: daily discipline, physical training, study, silence, commitment to principle. Do it consistently, not for appearance but for alignment. When your life reflects inner order, you stop reacting to outer insecurity. And when you stop reacting, you become unshakable. This is the Stoic advantage. You don't deny fear. You don't feed it. You outgrow it. And when you do, anxiety about aging and desirability becomes visible not as a weapon or a weakness, but as a signal that calm strength is needed. And you are prepared to provide it simply by being who you already decided to become. Number 4, need for control in relationships. The need for control in relationships often hides behind softer language: concern, care, emotional closeness. But at its core, it's about managing uncertainty. And uncertainty is what most people fear the most. When control becomes a quiet obsession, it's rarely about power over you. It's about power over anxiety, over outcomes, over the possibility of loss. Once you understand that, you stop reacting emotionally and start responding intelligently. More importantly, you stop giving away your center. Here's the shift you need to make first. Control only works on people who are internally unstable. If your sense of self moves every time someone pushes emotionally, control becomes easy. But when you're grounded, when your mood, decisions, and direction don't depend on external reassurance, control attempts lose oxygen. They can't breathe. Stoicism has always been clear on this. Epictetus said, "If you want to be free, do not desire what is outside your control." When you stop outsourcing your emotional balance, you become unreachable in the best way. The desire to control often shows up as emotional steering, subtle pressure, unspoken expectations, shifts in warmth or distance meant to guide your behavior. This only works if you chase harmony at the cost of self-respect. When your priority becomes keep things smooth, you start negotiating your boundaries without noticing. That's where control takes root, not through force but through your willingness to bend. The moment you decide that inner alignment matters more than emotional comfort, the dynamic changes. Reminded himself, "You don't have to turn this into something, it doesn't have to upset you." That sentence alone can rewire how you move. Control thrives on reaction. It feeds on urgency. It grows stronger when you rush to fix emotional tension, when you slow down instead, when you let silence exist, when you don't immediately adjust to emotional shifts. You reclaim your position. Calm is not passive. Calm is selective engagement. What weakens you isn't someone else's desire for control. It's your own fear of disapproval. Once you see that clearly, you stop personalizing behavior. You stop interpreting emotional fluctuations as signals you must respond to. Instead, you observe. You stay consistent. You act from principle. That steadiness creates a quiet resistance, not confrontation, resistance through self-possession. Seneca wrote, "No man is free who is not master of himself." Read that again. Control fails against self-mastery. When you regulate your emotions, your pace, your decisions, you remove leverage. You don't need to challenge control directly. You simply don't participate in it. You don't reward it with compliance or frustration. You continue as you are. That alone forces a. This is where many men slip. They think strength means pushing back aggressively or asserting dominance. That only escalates the struggle. Stoic strength is different. It's non-reactive. It's rooted. You don't argue about freedom. You demonstrate it. You don't explain your boundaries. You live them. When your behavior doesn't change in response to pressure, control loses its function. Now let's talk habits, because understanding this intellectually isn't enough. You need to train your nervous system to tolerate emotional tension without moving to fix it. Start small. When you feel the urge to explain yourself unnecessarily, pause, breathe. Let the urge pass, say less. Not to punish, just to stay aligned. Silence, when chosen calmly, is one of the most powerful signals of self-respect. Another exercise: define what you will not negotiate. Not what you demand, what you maintain. Your pace, your values, your time. Write them down, read them daily. Then act in accordance with them even when it creates discomfort, especially then. This is how internal authority is built, not through declarations but through repetition. You should also practice emotional ownership. When tension appears, don't absorb it, don't rush to resolve it. Ask yourself one simple question internally: is this mine to carry? Most of the time, the answer is no. Let emotions exist without assigning yourself responsibility for them. This is not detachment, it's clarity. Said the tranquility that comes when you stop caring what they say, or think or do, only what you do. That's the Stoic edge. You focus on your conduct, your response, your alignment. Control dissolves when it has nothing to grip. Over time, something interesting happens. When control no longer works on you, it often softens or disappears. Not because you fought it, but because there's no reward in it anymore. People adjust to the energy you consistently present. When that energy is steady, self-directed, and emotionally contained, dynamics shift naturally. The real takeaway is this: you don't need to outmaneuver control. You need to outgrow it. Become so anchored in your values that external pressure feels irrelevant. Train yourself to stay calm where others rush, steady where others sway. When you do, you don't just protect yourself, you elevate the entire dynamic. So stop reacting, stop over-explaining, stop surrendering your center to maintain peace. Choose self-mastery daily. As the Stoics taught, freedom isn't given, it's practiced. And once you practice it consistently, control no longer finds a place to land. Number 5. Fear of abandonment. Fear of abandonment sits quietly beneath the surface, rarely announced, often but constantly influencing behavior. You can feel it in the subtle shift, the emotional tightening, the unspoken need for reassurance. It isn't weakness in the childish sense, it's human, but it is a vulnerability. And when you understand it, not intellectually but energetically, your entire way of showing up changes. You stop reacting. You stop overgiving. You stop chasing emotional certainty. Instead, you become grounded. And grounding is unsettling to fear, because fear feeds on instability. At its core, fear of abandonment is the fear of being left emotionally exposed, not chosen, not prioritized, replaced, forgotten. That fear doesn't always look like desperation. Sometimes it looks like control, sometimes like testing, sometimes like emotional distance disguised as strength. What matters is this: fear wants proof. And the more you try to provide proof, the more power the fear gains. This is where most men lose themselves. They try to soothe something that cannot be soothed externally. The Stoics understood this deeply. Epictetus said, "If you want to be invincible, make yourself dependent on nothing that lies outside your own will." Fear of abandonment is dependence turned inward. It waits for reassurance from the outside to quiet the noise inside. When you try to manage that fear for someone else, you step into a role that costs you your center. Stoicism teaches the opposite approach. You remain rooted. You don't withdraw, but you don't overextend either. You let your steadiness speak. Here's the shift you need to make. Stop trying to prevent loss. Start embodying completeness. Fear dissolves in the presence of someone who is not afraid of absence. When you are comfortable with space, silence, uncertainty, you communicate something powerful without saying a word. You are not clinging to outcomes. And paradoxically, that reduces the very fear you're no longer feeding. Wrote, never let the future disturb you. You will meet it if you have to with the same weapons of reason which today arm you against the present. Fear of abandonment lives in imagined futures. What if this ends? What if I'm not enough? What if I'm left behind? Your role is not to argue with those thoughts. Your role is to remain present and consistent regardless of them. You don't accelerate intimacy to lock someone in. You don't retreat to punish uncertainty. You stay aligned. This is where your habits matter. If your emotional state shifts based on perceived closeness or distance, you're already compromised. You must train yourself to remain steady. Same tone, same pace, same self-respect. Fear tests for cracks. Consistency closes them. When you don't chase reassurance, when you don't panic at emotional fluctuations, you become a mirror. Fear sees itself and has nothing to attach to. Seneca warned, "He who suffers before it is necessary suffers more than is necessary." Fear of abandonment suffers in advance. It creates problems that haven't happened yet. When you refuse to participate in that premature suffering, you become an anchor, not a rescuer. An anchor. There's a difference. Rescuers exhaust themselves. Anchors remain. Now let's get practical. Start with this exercise. For the next week, practice emotional neutrality in moments of uncertainty. That doesn't mean coldness. It means you don't rush to fill silence. You don't over-explain. You don't seek confirmation. You breathe, you slow down, you stay present. Notice how uncomfortable this feels at first. That discomfort is your old conditioning trying to regain control. Another exercise, write down what abandonment would actually mean to you. Strip away drama, remove stories, reduce it to facts. You'll notice something important. You survive it in your imagination. And if you can survive it there, you don't need to fear it in reality. This shifts your posture completely. You stop negotiating from fear and start choosing from strength. You should also train detachment, not emotional withdrawal but outcome independence. Said, you can strip away many superfluous things troubling you, for they lie entirely in your own judgment. Detachment is stripping away the need to secure the future emotionally. You show up fully, but you don't grip. You care, but you don't cling. This balance is rare, and rarity creates respect. Fear of abandonment loses power when it's not rewarded, when reassurance isn't endlessly supplied, when drama isn't escalated, when space is allowed without punishment. Your calm response teaches a lesson without words. Connection is chosen, not coerced. That lesson lands deeper than any explanation ever could. Over time, you'll notice a shift in yourself too. You'll become less reactive, less anxious, less invested in outcomes you can't control. And this internal change is the real victory. Because once you're no longer afraid of being left, you stop tolerating behavior that disrespects your time, energy, or values. Epictetus also said, freedom is secured not by the fulfilling of one's desires, but by the removal of desire. Fear of abandonment is desire for certainty. Remove the desire and fear collapses. You're not indifferent, you're free. So take action, practice steadiness, embrace space. Let silence exist. Let uncertainty breathe. Every time you don't rush to secure connection, you strengthen yourself. And strength, when quiet and grounded, has a way of calming fear without ever numbing it. Number 6. Comparison with other women. Comparison is one of the quietest struggles people carry, and also one of the most exhausting. It rarely announces itself. It hums in the background, measuring, weighing, ranking. When it comes to comparison with other women, it often hides behind confidence, humor, even self-assurance. But beneath that surface is a constant internal scoreboard, always updating, always watching. You don't see it directly, yet you feel its effects in subtle shifts of mood, energy, and behavior. And once you understand this dynamic, you stop reacting to it and start moving differently. The Stoics warned about comparison long before social hierarchies became loud and public. Wrote, "How much time he gains who does not look to see what his neighbor says or does or thinks, but only at what he does himself." Comparison steals presence. It pulls attention outward instead of inward. When someone is locked in comparison, they are never fully here. Part of them is elsewhere, scanning, measuring, adjusting. That creates tension, and tension leaks. What's important for you is not to judge this tendency, but to recognize how it operates. Comparison thrives on uncertainty. When someone is unsure of their own standing, they look sideways. When their sense of value wavers, they seek reference points. Other women become mirrors, sometimes threatening, sometimes reassuring, but never neutral. This internal comparison creates emotional noise. And emotional noise often leads to subtle testing, reassurance seeking, or shifts in behavior that don't quite match the moment. Here, where your advantage lies, you don't need to point it out. You don't need to respond to it directly. In fact, doing so weakens your position. The Stoic approach is always the same: return to center. Epictetus said, "If you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid." In other words, stop managing perception. When you refuse to play the ranking game, when you don't elevate, diminish, or compare, you remove the fuel. Comparison needs participation to stay alive. This is where many men unknowingly fail. They try to reassure, they try to balance, they try to smooth things over. In doing so, they step into the comparison arena and validate it. A Stoic does the opposite. You remain steady. You don't get pulled into silent competitions you never agreed to join. Your calm becomes contrast, and contrast reveals insecurity without you ever nomming it. Understand this clearly: comparison is not about others, it's about identity. When identity is unstable, comparison becomes a crutch. That's why it's hidden. Admitting comparison feels like admitting weakness. So it disguises itself as curiosity, critique, or concern. You don't need to dissect it. You need to stop feeding it with your reactions. Reminded himself, it is not things themselves that disturb us, but our judgments about them. Comparison is a judgment loop. When you stay grounded in your own standards, you don't reinforce that loop. You don't reward emotional spikes. You don't shift your behavior to restore balance. You stay consistent, and consistency quietly exposes what comparison tries to hide. Now let's bring this back to you and your habits. The first practice is internal. Stop comparing yourself. You cannot rise above a dynamic you still live inside. Each time you catch yourself measuring your worth against someone else's progress, status, or approval, pause, breathe, redirect. Ask yourself one question only: am I acting according to my values right now? That question cuts through comparison instantly. Second practice, neutral presence. When comparison energy appears, don't amplify it, don't soothe it, don't challenge it. Simply remain the same. Same tone, same pace, same grounded demeanor. This takes discipline. At first, your instinct will be to fix the tension. Resist that urge. Stoicism is not about fixing emotions, it's about not being ruled by them. Seneca wrote, "He who suffers before it is necessary suffers more than is necessary." Comparison creates imagined losses, imagined threats, imagined hierarchies. When you refuse to respond to those illusions, you remove their power. You show through action that you are not living in a mental tournament. Another exercise: build a daily practice of self-measurement instead of social measurement. At the end of each day, reflect briefly. Did you act with restraint? Did you speak with clarity? Did you maintain your composure? This aligns perfectly with Stoic evening reflection. Did this nightly. Not to judge himself harshly, but to recalibrate. When you do this, comparison loses relevance. You're too busy refining your own character. You should also train silence, not withdrawal, restraint. When comparison seeks engagement, silence starves it. Silence doesn't mean absence. It means presence without performance. This is difficult because silence feels like inaction. It's not. It's mastery. Epictetus taught that freedom begins when you stop needing to respond to every impression. Comparison is just another impression. Let it pass. Over time, something shifts. When you no longer participate in comparison, others feel it. The tension has nowhere to land. The hidden struggle becomes visible, not because you exposed it, but because you didn't cover it up. And paradoxically, this often creates attraction because certainty is calming. You're no longer reactive. You're not adjusting your worth based on invisible scorecards. Remember this, you don't win by being chosen over someone else. You win by being unmovable in who you are. The Stoics never chased superiority. They chased alignment, said, "The happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts." When your thoughts are free from comparison, your presence becomes grounded. That grounded presence changes the dynamic without force. So your task is simple but not easy. Stop ranking. Stop reacting. Stop managing invisible competitions. Build yourself inwardly. Act from principle. Remain steady. Let comparison exhaust itself in your silence. When you do, you'll notice that what was once hidden no longer has power over you. And that is real strength, quiet, disciplined, and deeply stoic. Number 7. Sensitivity to perceived rejection. Sensitivity to perceived rejection runs deeper than most people are willing to admit, and it shapes far more behavior than surface-level confidence ever reveals. What looks like indifference is often alertness. What looks like control is often anticipation. Rejection doesn't need to be spoken to be felt. It only needs to be imagined. And when something is imagined often enough, the body reacts as if it's real. That's the quiet pressure behind many emotional shifts. The Stoics understood this long before psychology gave it language. They knew that pain doesn't come from events themselves, but from the meaning assigned to them. You need to understand this not to manipulate, but to ground yourself. Because when someone is highly sensitive to perceived rejection, they scan constantly. Tone changes are, silence becomes a verdict. Neutrality feels like distance, and distance feels like danger. This sensitivity isn't weakness in the crude sense, it's overinvestment in interpretation. The mind fills gaps aggressively because it's trying to protect itself. But protection through vigilance becomes exhaustion. And exhaustion leaks out in subtle ways. Wrote, "If you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it." That sentence alone dismantles the entire mechanism of perceived rejection. The issue isn't what happens, it's what the mind decides it means. And once meaning hardens, emotion follows. The Stoic path is about slowing that process down, creating space between stimulus and story. That space is power. As a man, your role is not to soothe imagined wounds or chase emotional interpretations. Your role is to remain centered. When you don't rush to correct assumptions, when you don't over-explain neutrality, when you don't react to subtle emotional spikes, something important happens. The emotional system across from you is forced to regulate itself. That's not cruelty. That's leadership. You are showing, without words, that not every internal alarm deserves external action. Seneca warned, "We suffer more in imagination than in reality." Sensitivity to perceived rejection thrives on imagination. It feeds on unanswered questions, pauses, and ambiguity. If you panic in those moments, if you rush to reassure or clarify every silence, you reinforce the idea that imagined rejection is real and urgent. But when you remain steady, when you don't collapse into reassurance, you quietly communicate something stronger. Absence of reaction does not equal abandonment. This is where your habits matter. You must train yourself to stop responding to emotional cues that are not grounded in reality. Not with coldness, but with calm. Calm is the antidote to imagined rejection. It doesn't argue. It doesn't convince. It simply stays. And staying without shifting your behavior to manage someone else's interpretation is profoundly grounding. Epictetus taught, "It is not things that disturb us but our judgments about things." Keep that close. When someone reacts to something that wasn't said, to meaning that wasn't intended, the Stoic response is not correction, it's consistency. You don't rush to fill emotional gaps. You don't reshape yourself to prevent discomfort. You let the moment pass without escalating it. This trains both you and the other person that emotional stability doesn't require constant reassurance. Here's a practical exercise you should adopt immediately. Practice delayed response. Not silence as punishment, pause as discipline. When emotional tension appears, give yourself a few breaths before reacting. Let your nervous system settle. Then respond only to what was actually expressed, not what you think was felt. This keeps you anchored in reality rather than pulled into imagined narratives. Another exercise. Write down the difference between rejection and non-engagement. Most people confuse the two. Rejection is a decision. Non-engagement is a neutral state. Train your mind to separate them. This distinction alone dissolves much of the emotional charge around perceived rejection. When you live from this clarity, you no longer take responsibility for interpretations that aren't yours. You also need to examine your own sensitivity. If perceived rejection triggers urgency in you, it will trigger reaction. Stoicism begins internally. Ask yourself where you rush to be understood, where you feel compelled to explain neutrality, where silence unsettles you. These are the places to train, because the more regulated you become, the less you'll be pulled into emotional turbulence that isn't grounded in reality. Also reminded himself, you always own the option of having no opinion. That applies here more than anywhere. You don't need to decide what silence means. You don't need to label distance as danger. You don't need to assign emotional weight to every shift. Choosing no interpretation is often the most powerful move you can make. When you live this way, something subtle changes. Sensitivity to perceived rejection loses its leverage. Emotional spikes soften. Tests dissolve without confrontation. Not because you dominated anything, but because you refused to participate in imagined narratives. You stayed in reality. You stayed composed. And composure is contagious. Make this your discipline. Respond to facts, not fears. Maintain warmth without urgency. Presence without explanation. Consistency without chasing clarity. This is Stoic strength in motion. And when you embody it, you stop being pulled into emotional undercurrents that were never yours to manage in the first place. Number 8. Difficulty with direct communication. Difficulty with direct communication isn't weakness in the way most people think. It's not about lack of intelligence or emotional depth. It's about hesitation, about friction between what is felt and what is said. And once you understand that, you stop reacting emotionally and start responding strategically. You don't take things personally. You don't chase clarity with urgency. You recognize the pattern for what it is, and that alone puts you in a position of quiet strength. What's often hidden is this. Indirect communication usually comes from fear, not manipulation. Fear of conflict, fear of being judged, fear of saying the wrong thing and losing leverage or approval. Instead of stating needs plainly, emotions are hinted at. Signals replace statements. Silence replaces honesty. And when you don't understand this dynamic, you end up filling in the gaps with assumptions, overthinking, or unnecessary effort. That's where many men lose ground. They respond to what they think is being said, rather than what actually is. The Stoics warned against this exact trap. Epictetus said, "We suffer not from events but from our judgments about them." Indirect communication invites misjudgment. It tempts you to interpret tone instead of content, mood instead of meaning. A Stoic approach is different. You don't guess. You don't rush. You don't force conversations into clarity. You stay grounded and let ambiguity reveal itself over time. Calm presence becomes your filter. And calm presence always exposes what urgency hides. Here, the key shift you need to make. Stop rewarding indirectness with emotional labor. When you over-explain, over-respond, or over-accommodate vague communication, you teach others that clarity isn't required. But when you remain composed and consistent, something interesting happens. Indirectness loses its power. The pressure shifts. Either communication becomes clearer or distance naturally increases. Both outcomes serve you. Be tolerant with others and strict with yourself. Being tolerant doesn't mean chasing understanding. It means allowing people to be who they are without abandoning your own standards. You don't demand directness. You model it, you speak plainly, you respond simply. You don't mirror confusion. You don't escalate emotion to extract honesty. You remain steady. And steadiness creates contrast. That contrast makes indirectness obvious without you ever pointing it out. This is where action matters. You need to practice restraint. When something is unclear, resist the urge to decode it. Let silence do some of the work. Let space breathe. Not as a tactic, but as a discipline. Stoicism teaches you to sit with uncertainty without anxiety. Seneca said, "He who suffers before it is necessary suffers more than is necessary." Chasing clarity prematurely is exactly that. You suffer twice, once in imagination, once in reality. Direct communication thrives around emotional safety, not pressure. And emotional safety is created by your consistency, not your persuasion. When you don't react impulsively to mixed signals, when your behavior doesn't spike or dip based on ambiguity, you signal maturity. You show that you don't need everything spelled out immediately to remain grounded. That alone changes how people communicate around you. Now let's make this practical. First exercise, simplify your responses. Fewer words, slower pace, neutral tone. Practice answering without filling space. This retrains your impulse to manage other people's emotions. You're not responsible for translating feelings that weren't clearly expressed. That responsibility belongs to the speaker. Second exercise, notice when you feel the urge to clarify for someone else. Pause, ask yourself if clarity is being avoided or simply not offered yet. There's a difference. Choose patience over pursuit. This strengthens emotional discipline, which is the foundation of Stoic masculinity. Third exercise, commit to direct communication yourself. No hints, no emotional bait. Say what you mean calmly and without expectation, not to teach, not to provoke, but to align. Over time, people either rise to that level or reveal they can't meet it. Either way, you gain information without conflict. Also reminded himself, never let the future disturb you. You will meet it if you have to with the same weapons of reason which today arm you against the present. When communication feels unclear, reason is your weapon, not suspicion, not frustration, not force. Reason allows you to observe patterns without becoming entangled in them. Difficulty with direct communication isn't something you fix in others. It's something you outgrow reacting to. When you stop chasing clarity, clarity either appears or becomes irrelevant. When you stop emotional overinvestment, conversations either deepen or fade, and both outcomes are forms of truth. This is where Stoicism quietly wins. You don't demand openness. You don't punish vagueness. You simply remain centered. Your boundaries are clean. Your responses are measured. Your standards don't fluctuate. And in that calm consistency, indirectness loses its leverage. You don't need to confront it. You don't need to call it out. You simply don't build your decisions around it. So adopt this habit. When communication is unclear, slow down. When signals are mixed, remain neutral. When emotions are implied, don't rush to interpret. Let action speak. Let time clarify. Let your steadiness set the tone. Over time, you'll notice something powerful. Conversations become simpler, dynamics become cleaner, and your inner state becomes harder to disturb. That is the Stoic edge. not control over others, but command over yourself. Number 9. Internal conflict between independence and attachment. There's a tension that lives quietly beneath the surface, rarely spoken aloud, often misunderstood. It's the pull between independence and attachment, the desire to be self-directed, autonomous, uncontained, and at the same time the longing to feel chosen, anchored, emotionally safe. This conflict doesn't announce itself. It leaks out in hesitation, mixed signals, emotional push and pull. And if you're paying attention, you can feel it long before it's ever explained. What matters isn't judging it. What matters is understanding it without being pulled into it. You see, humans crave freedom and connection simultaneously. That contradiction isn't new. The Stoics wrote about it centuries ago, not in the language of modern psychology, but in something deeper, self-mastery. Epictetus warned, "No man is free who is not master of himself." That line cuts straight to the core. The conflict between independence and attachment exists when self-mastery hasn't fully settled in, when the inner world hasn't been made orderly yet. Here, where you come in. Your power isn't in resolving someone else's internal tension. Your power is in refusing to absorb it. Most men lose ground because they try to stabilize what isn't theirs to fix. They lean in when distance appears. They pull back when closeness feels uncertain. They start adjusting themselves to match the oscillation. And slowly, without realizing it, they surrender their center. The Stoic path is different. It begins with one rule: you stay rooted, you don't chase independence, you don't chase attachment, you don't mirror uncertainty, you become consistent, calm, whole. Wrote, "If you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it." That applies here more than you might think. The moment you interpret emotional fluctuation as something you must respond to, fix, or outmaneuver, you give it power. The moment you stop interpreting it, and instead stay aligned with your own values, it loses its grip. This internal conflict shows itself because attachment feels risky. Dependence threatens identity, yet complete independence feels empty without emotional resonance. That push and pull creates friction, but friction only becomes chaos when you step into it emotionally. When you stay grounded, when you don't react, when your behavior doesn't change based on someone else's internal weather, something subtle happens. The tension is exposed without being confronted. And exposure dissolves illusions. Your task isn't to exploit this conflict, it's to outgrow it. When you embody emotional self-sufficiency, you stop triggering the fear that closeness means loss of self. You show, without words, that connection doesn't require collapse. That presence doesn't demand possession. That attraction can exist without emotional bargaining. This is where discipline enters, not discipline over others, discipline over yourself. Seneca wrote, "He suffers more than necessary who suffers before it is necessary." Emotional overinvestment is premature suffering. Overinterpretation is premature suffering. Trying to secure certainty from uncertainty is premature suffering. You don't need to rush clarity. You need to maintain posture. And posture is internal. Here's a practice you should adopt immediately. Every time you feel the urge to lean forward emotionally, pause. Ask yourself one question: am I acting from alignment or from anxiety? Then act only if the answer is alignment. This trains you to move from principle instead of impulse. Over time, your nervous system learns that stillness is safe. Silence is safe. Waiting is safe. Another practice: define your emotional pace and refuse to abandon it. Not as a tactic, as a standard. Decide how quickly you attach, how deeply you invest, how much access you give, and then stick to it regardless of emotional fluctuations around you. This creates contrast, and contrast reveals internal conflicts without you saying a word. Also said, the tranquility that comes when you stop caring what they say, or think, or do only what you do. That line isn't about indifference. It's about sovereignty. When you operate from your own center, you stop being pulled into unresolved tensions that aren't yours to carry. Here's the paradox you need to internalize. The more complete you are within yourself, the less threatening closeness becomes. Not just for you, but for anyone around you. You stop triggering fear by needing. You stop creating pressure by wanting reassurance. Your presence becomes spacious, and space allows people to confront their own contradictions without you forcing anything. This is why Stoics pass tests without knowing they're being tested. They don't try to win. They don't try to secure. They don't try to stabilize others emotionally. They stabilize themselves. You should also train emotional non-reactivity deliberately, not suppression. Non-reactivity, there's a difference. Suppression is avoidance. Non-reactivity is awareness without movement. Sit with discomfort. Let ambiguity exist. Let unanswered questions remain unanswered. This strengthens your inner frame, and a strong inner frame changes dynamics automatically. One more exercise. Write this sentence down and read it daily. I do not abandon my values to gain emotional certainty. Then live it, in small moments, in quiet decisions, in what you choose not to do. The conflict between independence and attachment is resolved internally, not externally. When you embody wholeness, you stop becoming a mirror for indecision. You stop feeding emotional tug-of-war. You remain steady, and steadiness is confronting, not because it's aggressive, but because it refuses to play along. Epictetus put it simply, seek not that the things which happen should happen as you wish, but wish the things which happen to be as they are. When you accept emotional contradictions without trying to manage them, you free yourself, and freedom is felt instantly. So don't chase closeness, don't retreat to appear distant, don't calibrate yourself to emotional swings. Anchor yourself, build your inner order, act from it relentlessly. When you do, the hidden conflict becomes visible, and when it's visible, it loses its power over you. You've just seen what most people never slow down enough to notice. These weren't accusations. They were not attacks. They were patterns, quiet, human, and deeply revealing. And the real power here isn't using this knowledge to control anyone. It's using it to control yourself. Because the Stoics understood something timeless. The man who sees clearly is never desperate, never reactive, never easily manipulated. When you understand what's hidden beneath behavior, you stop chasing approval, stop over-explaining, and stop taking things personally. You become grounded, observant, calm. And that calm is felt more strongly than any words you could ever say. Remember, strength is silent, awareness is magnetic, and self-mastery changes every interaction you step into. If this video shifted the way you see relationships, even slightly, then don't stop here. Rewatch it. Let the ideas settle. Notice them in real life. That's where the real transformation happens. And if you want more Stoic truths like this, clear, grounded, and brutally honest, make sure you stay connected. The next video goes even deeper, and you won't want to miss it. Until then, stay disciplined, stay observant, and above all, stay unshaken.